The universe operates on principles we understand: physics, chemistry, the fundamental laws of cause and effect. Warp fields bend spacetime. Subspace carries faster than light communications. Matter and antimatter annihilate in controlled reactions. But what happens when two universes, each governed by their own physical laws, collide? When hyperspace intersects subspace? When a mind trained in the art of war across 1,000 star systems finds itself in a galaxy that has never known the Empire, the Republic, or the Force? The spatial anomaly registered on Deep Space Nine sensors at 0347 hours as a Class 7 subspace rupture, violent, unpredictable, and thankfully brief. By the time Commander Sisko reached Ops, it had already collapsed, leaving only residual tachyon emissions and a puzzled science officer. "Any ships caught in it?" Sisko asked, settling into the command chair with his morning Raktajino still steaming. "Negative, sir," Jadzia Dax replied, her fingers dancing across the science console. The rupture occurred in empty space, 17 million kilometers from the station. Whatever caused it came from, well, somewhere else entirely. The energy signature doesn't match anything in our database. Another wormhole? Chief O'Brien suggested from the engineering station, though his tone carried skepticism. Different mechanism entirely, Dax said. This was more like two pieces of fabric tearing where they shouldn't touch. If I didn't know better, I'd say two completely different spacetime continuums briefly intersected. Sisko exchanged a glance with his first officer. In the third year of the Dominion War, briefly intersected was rarely followed by good news. Run a full sensor sweep. If something came through that rupture, I want to know what and where. But the anomaly had deposited its cargo far from Federation sensors. 17 hours away at maximum warp, a Cardassian freighter, the Balar, running medical supplies to a civilian outpost near the Badlands, detected a small object tumbling through space. No life signs, according to their rudimentary sensors. Probably debris from some long-forgotten battle, worth investigating only if it contained salvageable technology. The Balar's captain, Gul Torin, was a practical man who'd survived the Dominion's absorption of Cardassia by knowing when to ask questions and when to simply profit. He ordered the object brought aboard. It was a body. Humanoid, unconscious but alive, wearing a uniform unlike anything in Torin's 40 years of military and merchant service. White fabric, immaculately tailored despite the journey through whatever hell had deposited this being in Cardassian space. Gold insignia on the collar, 6 rank cylinders arranged in 2 rows. Most striking were the eyes, even closed, something about the bone structure suggested they would be red when opened. Chiss, Torin's sensor operator suggested, referencing an obscure species from old intelligence reports. But they're from the unknown regions, haven't been seen in decades. Not Chiss, Torin said quietly, studying the blue skin, the angular features. Something else. Get him to the medical bay. And send an encrypted message to our Dominion liaison. They pay well for interesting things. The being's eyes opened 6 hours later. Red, as predicted, but containing something that made Torin instinctively step back, not fear, precisely, but the recognition of a predator's gaze. The being sat up smoothly, assessing his surroundings with methodical precision. His eyes moved from the medical equipment to the guards, to the viewport showing streaking stars, to Torin himself. The entire evaluation took perhaps 3 seconds. When he spoke, the words were incomprehensible, a language neither the Cardassian database nor the ship's limited universal translator could parse. But the tone was unmistakable: command, analysis, question. Torin spread his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of non-aggression. You're aboard the Cardassian freighter Balar. I am Gul Torin. You were found drifting in space near the Badlands. The being tilted his head slightly, processing. Then, remarkably, he began to speak in broken Cardassian, not through technology, but through linguistic analysis. Torin realized with a chill that this being was learning their language in real time, extrapolating grammar from Torin's brief statement and the guard's nervous mutterings. Cardassian, the being said carefully, the accent thick but comprehensible. Not familiar. This ship. Technology. Different. He gestured to the medical scanner. Principles, not Imperial. Not Republic. Where? The Alpha Quadrant, Thrawn replied. Though I suspect that means nothing to you. What's your name? Your rank? The being stood, and despite being unarmed and surrounded by guards with disruptors, somehow commanded the room. Grand Admiral Thrawn. Mithranuru Odo of the Chiss Ascendancy, Supreme Commander of the Imperial Fleet. He paused, red eyes narrowing. Formerly. Over the next 72 hours, as the Balar continued toward its destination with the unexpected passenger confined but comfortable, Thrawn absorbed information with frightening efficiency. He studied everything Thrawn permitted, star charts, basic technology readouts, cultural databases. He asked precise questions about the political landscape, listening with absolute focus to descriptions of the Federation, the Dominion War, the Cardassian Union subordination to the Founders. Thrawn, despite himself, found the conversations intellectually stimulating. This Thrawn understood military strategy in ways that transcended species and technology. When shown Cardassian battle formations, he immediately identified their strengths and 3 critical weaknesses. When told of the Dominion's Jem'Hadar soldiers, he asked not about their combat capabilities but about their psychological conditioning and command structure. Art, Thrawn said on the 3rd day, studying a Cardassian sculpture in Thrawn's quarters, a traditional piece depicting the military occupation of Bajorans. Your people value order, hierarchy. The sculpture emphasizes vertical lines, strong foundations. But there. He pointed to a subtle asymmetry in the upper portion. Ambition. A reaching beyond current station. Your culture encourages competition within structure. Thrawn stared. He'd owned that sculpture for 15 years and never seen what this stranger extracted in moments. The Dominion, Thrawn continued, rules through genetic engineering and addiction. The Jem'Hadar depend on Ketracel white. The Vorta are cloned. The Founders shape themselves literally. His red eyes fixed on Thrawn. They create art through biology. This tells me everything about how they wage war. And what does it tell you? Thrawn asked, genuinely curious. That they can be defeated. Every artist has patterns. Every pattern has vulnerabilities. Thrawn's expression remained neutral, but something flickered behind those eyes, calculation stretching far beyond this conversation. Where are we going, Gul Thrawn? Deep Space Nine. Federation station in Bajoran space. It's neutral ground during the war, more or less. A place where people like me can still do business. Thrawn hesitated. They'll want to meet you. Everyone will want to meet you. The Federation, the Romulans, probably Section 31 if they hear about you. My advice? Choose carefully who you trust. This galaxy eats the naive. Thrawn stood before the viewport, watching the stars stream past at warp speed. Behind him, Thrawn couldn't see the faint smile. The Grand Admiral had been eaten by one galaxy's politics already. He would not make the same mistakes in another. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Trek universe, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. Live long and prosper. The Balar dropped out of warp 3 days later, and there, against the backdrop of the Bajoran system's gentle sun, hung Deep Space Nine, a Cardassian design repurposed by its former victims, now a symbol of everything the Alpha Quadrant hoped to become. Thrawn studied its architecture through the viewport, already analyzing its defensive capabilities, traffic patterns, and strategic importance. Gul Thrawn stood beside him. Last chance to tell me who you really are. I already have, Thrawn replied. A soldier far from home, trying to understand a new battlefield. That's what worries me, Thrawn muttered. But he'd already sent the transmission. Whatever happened next was beyond his control. In ops, Commander Sisko received the message with growing intrigue. An unknown humanoid, possibly of strategic value, speaking languages that predated the Universal Translators database. Gul Torin was many things, but he wasn't prone to exaggeration. Have him beam directly to the promenade, Sisko ordered. Public space, plenty of witnesses, security standing by. Let's see what the galaxy dragged to our doorstep. Thrawn materialized in a shimmer of light, his first experience with transporter technology, though his expression revealed nothing. He stood still for 3 seconds, allowing his body to confirm it was indeed still intact and whole, then surveyed his surroundings with that same methodical precision that had unnerved Gul Torin. The promenade was busy, Bajorans, humans, Ferengi, species he'd never encountered. But what caught his attention were the shops, the artwork displayed in windows, the cultural artifacts. He walked slowly toward a Bajoran merchant stall, ignoring the security officers shadowing him, and studied a small sculpture of the prophets. The Bajoran people worship stability within change, he said aloud in flawless Federation standard, another language acquired through observation. They've suffered occupation, yet their art remains focused on spiritual transcendence rather than revenge. Fascinating. Most people start with, "Hello," a voice said behind him. Thrawn turned to face Commander Benjamin Sisko, flanked by Major Kira Nerys and Lieutenant Commander Worf. He recognized command authority immediately, not through rank insignia, which meant nothing to him yet, but through posture, the deference of others, the way security personnel oriented themselves around this man. "Grand Admiral Thrawn," he said, offering a small bow that somehow conveyed both respect and equality. "I apologize for the unconventional arrival. I assure you, it was unintentional. Commander Benjamin Sisko. This is Deep Space Nine." Sisko's eyes studied Thrawn with the same intensity Thrawn had used on the sculpture moments before. Two tacticians recognizing each other across the void. "Grand Admiral is a significant rank. Care to tell me which military you serve?" The wardroom was sparse, functional furniture, a viewport overlooking the wormhole's distant position, a replicator in the corner. Thrawn catalogued every detail while Sisko ordered Raktajino for himself and gestured to the replicator. "I don't know what your biology requires, but the replicator can synthesize most nutritional profiles. Water will suffice for now." Thrawn watched the shimmering materialization with clinical interest. Matter-energy conversion. Elegant, though I suspect the energy requirements limit its military applications. "You'd be surprised what we've accomplished with it," Major Kira said, her tone carrying an edge. She hadn't taken her eyes off Thrawn since the promenade. "You said you serve a military that doesn't exist here. That implies you're from somewhere very far away." "Or somewhen," Dax added, entering with a PADD. "Commander, the linguistic analysis is fascinating. His language patterns don't match anything in the Federation database, but they follow consistent grammatical structures that suggest a highly developed civilization. Multiple language families, actually, he's been code-switching between at least 3 distinct linguistic roots." Thrawn took the water, sipped it, and set it down with deliberate precision. "Your science officer is correct. I am from elsewhere, not just geographically, but dimensionally. The spatial anomaly your station detected 3 days ago was the intersection point. My ship was in hyperspace when the collision occurred. I am, as far as I can determine, the only survivor." The room fell silent. Worf's hand had moved imperceptibly closer to his phaser. "Hyperspace isn't dimensionally separate," Dax said carefully. "It's a term for faster-than-light travel through subspace. In your universe, perhaps. In mine, hyperspace is a parallel dimension that permits superluminal travel along established routes. The collision with your subspace apparently destabilized the boundary." Thrawn's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in those red eyes, grief, perhaps, ruthlessly contained. "My crew, my ship, the empire I served, all are beyond my reach now. I am a soldier without a war, a commander without a command." Sisko leaned forward. "The empire. Which one?" The Galactic Empire. Though by the time of my departure, it had fractured significantly following Emperor Palpatine's death. I was attempting to reunify the Imperial remnants when the anomaly occurred. Thrawn paused, reading the room. I suspect those names mean nothing to you. Let me be direct, Commander. I find myself in a galaxy at war. The Dominion, the Federation, the Klingon Empire, the Romulan Star Empire, Ghoul Torin was quite informative. I have no resources, no political leverage, and no way home. What I do have is experience commanding fleets across 1,000 campaigns. And you're offering your services, Kira said flatly. Just like that. We're supposed to trust someone who commanded an empire? I'm offering information, Thrawn corrected. Trust is earned through demonstrated reliability. I understand military strategy, logistics, and most importantly, how to defeat enemies through cultural analysis rather than simple force projection. Your war with the Dominion has reached a stalemate. The Founders control vast resources, their Jem'Hadar are formidable soldiers, and their Vorta administrators are efficient. But every military force has patterns. Every culture has vulnerabilities. You learned all this from a Cardassian freighter captain in 3 days. Worf's skepticism was evident. I learned the framework. The details will require further study. Thrawn gestured to the viewport. For example, this station. Cardassian design, Federation operation, Bajoran sovereignty. The architecture tells me about the original builders, efficiency valued over comfort, surveillance built into the structure, defense prioritized over aesthetics. But the modifications tell me about you. The promenade's openness, the mixing of species, the presence of shops and temples alongside military facilities. You believe in diversity as strength, in open exchange of ideas. It makes you adaptable but also vulnerable to infiltration. Sisko's expression hardened slightly. You've been here 20 minutes and you're already identifying our weaknesses. I'm identifying patterns. Whether they're weaknesses depends on the threat model. Thrawn stood, moving to the viewport. The Dominion attacks through overwhelming force and psychological warfare. The Ketracel-White dependency ensures Jem'Hadar loyalty but also creates a logistical vulnerability. The Vorta cloning means institutional knowledge persists across lifespans, but it also means predictable behavior patterns. And the Founders themselves, he turned back to face them. Shapeshifters who rule through biology. They're artists, Commander Sisko. And I understand artists. Dax exchanged a glance with Sisko. This being's analytical capacity was extraordinary, and potentially dangerous. You keep mentioning art, she said. What does art have to do with military strategy? Everything. Thrawn's tone carried absolute certainty. Art is the soul of a species. It reveals how they think, what they value, what they fear. Show me a civilization's art, and I can predict how they'll wage war. The Cardassians create vertical sculptures emphasizing hierarchy, they attack through structured chain of command and value order above flexibility. The Bajorans create spiritual art focused on transcendence, they fight with passion but lack military cohesion, making them excellent insurgents but poor conventional soldiers. The Dominion, he paused. I would need to see their art. But I suspect it's biological. Living sculptures. Self-modification as aesthetic expression. The Founders can assume any form, Kira said quietly. They're the living art. Then they're vulnerable to pattern analysis like any artist. They'll have preferred forms, preferred strategies, preferred psychological approaches. Give me time, and I'll find them. Thrawn returned to his seat. But that's not why I requested this meeting. I need to understand the political structure of this quadrant. Who holds power? What are the competing interests? Where do the true battle lines exist? Sisko studied the Grand Admiral for a long moment. Every instinct told him this being was simultaneously offering genuine help and pursuing an agenda that extended far beyond simple survival. The Federation is a democratic alliance of over 150 worlds. We explore, we defend, we don't conquer. The Prime Directive prevents us from interfering with pre-warp civilizations. We value diplomacy over warfare, though the Dominion has tested that principle severely. A republic, Thrawn said. I'm familiar with the structure. They tend toward inefficiency but possess remarkable resilience. Your Senate. Council. The Federation Council. Will be divided on how to prosecute this war. Doves advocating negotiation, Hawks demanding total victory, pragmatists seeking any advantage. Thrawn's fingers steepled. They'll see me as both opportunity and threat. Some will want to exploit my knowledge. Others will want me imprisoned or eliminated as an unknown variable. You're not wrong, Sisko admitted. Which is why I need to know your intentions. You said you can't go home. What do you want here? The question hung in the air. Thrawn was silent for several seconds, his red eyes focused on something beyond the room's walls. To survive. To understand. And eventually, to find a way back. His gaze returned to Sisko. But those are long-term objectives. In the immediate term, I need information, resources, and the freedom to operate. In exchange, I can provide strategic consultation. Not as a member of Starfleet, I suspect your regulations wouldn't accommodate me, but as an independent advisor. Independent advisors with military expertise tend to become mercenaries, Worf observed. I have no interest in currency or power in this galaxy. I'm interested in patterns, in understanding how warfare functions in a universe with different physical laws and different cultural paradigms. Thrawn leaned forward slightly. Consider this a research opportunity, Commander. I'll help you win battles. You'll help me understand the battlefield. Kira shook her head. This is insane. We know nothing about him except that he claims to be from another dimension and commanded an empire. For all we know, he's a Dominion plant, a founder in a very convincing disguise. A valid concern, Thrawn acknowledged. How do you typically verify identity in cases of suspected shapeshifter infiltration? Blood screening, Worf said. Changeling blood doesn't maintain cohesion when separated from the body. Then test me. I'll submit to whatever verification protocols you require. Thrawn extended his hand. I am precisely what I claim to be, a stranger in a strange land, offering the only commodity I possess. Strategic expertise. Sisko made a decision that would ripple across the Alpha Quadrant for months to come. Dax, run a full medical scan. Worf, security protocols remain in effect. Major, coordinate with Odo, I want his assessment. He stood, facing Thrawn directly. You'll be confined to guest quarters until we verify your story and determine what to do with you. If you're genuine, we'll talk further. If you're not, he let the implication hang. Understood. Thrawn rose smoothly. Commander, one more thing. You have a changeling on your security staff. The one you call Odo. Every weapon in the room came up simultaneously. Thrawn didn't move. How do you know about Odo? Sisko demanded. Ghoul Torin mentioned changeling infiltrators. Basic logic suggested you'd employ one as a countermeasure, who better to identify a shapeshifter than another shapeshifter. When I observed the promenade, I noticed your security chief never blinked. Humanoids blink. I assumed either advanced surveillance equipment in a humanoid shell, or a being maintaining humanoid form by choice rather than biology. Given the tactical value, the latter seemed more probable. Sisko exhaled slowly. You deduced Odo's nature from watching the promenade for 10 minutes. 12 minutes. And the deduction was probabilistic, not certain, until your reaction confirmed it. Thrawn's expression might have been a smile, if one generously interpreted the slight softening around his eyes. I meant no offense. I was simply demonstrating that I observe carefully. It's what I do. As security escorted Thrawn to the guest quarters, Sisko returned to the viewport, watching the blue-skinned admiral disappear down the corridor. "Old man," he said quietly, "what do you think?" Dax came to stand beside him. "I think he's the most dangerous person to walk onto this station since Dukat. And I think he's telling the truth. Both those things worry me. He's too valuable to ignore and too dangerous to trust," Kira added. "The Cardassians taught me what happens when you underestimate strategic genius." Worf's assessment was characteristically direct. He would make a powerful ally. Or a devastating enemy. We must determine which before others do. Others? Sisko turned. The Romulans have informants on the station. Section 31 certainly knows about him by now. And the Dominion, Worf's expression darkened. They're always seeking advantages. If Thrawn's abilities are genuine, every power in the quadrant will want to recruit or eliminate him. Sisko nodded slowly. Then we need to move fast. Dax, I want a full analysis of everything he said. Cross-reference his strategic assessments against known Dominion tactics. If he's as good as he claims, his observations should yield actionable intelligence. And if they do? Kira asked. Then we have decisions to make. Sisko turned back to the stars. The kind that keep me awake at night. In the guest quarters, comfortable but clearly monitored, Thrawn stood before a computer terminal that security had forgotten to deactivate. He'd noticed the oversight immediately. It was deliberate, a test to see what he'd access. He called up public databases. Federation history. Dominion War battle reports. Cultural archives from dozens of species. And art. Volumes of art. A Vorta diplomatic sculpture, all smooth curves and pleasant symmetry. Jem'Hadar ceremonial weapons, brutal and efficient. And deeper in the database, restricted but accessible to someone who understood security protocols built on different logical frameworks, fragments of intelligence on the founders themselves. Thrawn studied a single image, a founder in their natural gelatinous state, captured during a brief diplomatic exchange before the war. The form was asymmetrical, constantly shifting, refusing to maintain any structure for long. Perfection through formlessness, he murmured. You're afraid of structure because structure can be analyzed. But formlessness is itself a pattern. He shut down the terminal and moved to the viewport. Deep Space Nine hung against the stars, this galaxy's conflicts playing out in its corridors and wardrooms. The Federation, noble but constrained. The Dominion, ruthless but predictable. And somewhere in the shadows, other players he'd only begun to identify. The game had changed. The board was different. But the fundamental principles remained. Understand the enemy's art. Identify their patterns. Exploit their weaknesses. Thrawn had played this game across an entire galaxy once before. He would play it again. And this time, he'd ensure a different ending. Behind him, the door chimed. He turned to find Odo standing in the entrance, his liquid features carefully arranged into something approximating skepticism. I understand you're quite observant, the Changeling said. And I understand you're quite unique, Thrawn replied. Constable Odo, I presume. I've been hoping to speak with you. Have you? Odo entered, the door closing behind him. And why would an Imperial Grand Admiral want to speak with a Changeling security chief? Because, Thrawn said simply, you're the only person on this station who might truly understand what it means to be fundamentally different from those around you. And because if I'm to understand the Founders, I need to understand you first. Odo's expression shifted, surprise, quickly concealed. You realize I'm nothing like the Founders. I was raised by solids. I chose this life. Which makes you invaluable. You understand both perspectives. Thrawn gestured to the seating area. Tell me, Constable, what does Changeling art look like? And despite every instinct telling him to maintain professional distance, Odo found himself sitting down. Because nobody Nobody in all his years among solids had ever asked him that question. Odo had lived among solids for decades. He'd been poked, prodded, studied, and categorized. He'd been called specimen, asset, and occasionally friend. But nobody had ever asked him what changeling art looked like. We don't create art in the way solids do, Odo said carefully, still processing the question. We are the art. Every form we take, every shape we assume, that's our expression. Then your people are performance artists, Thrawn replied, leaning forward with genuine interest. Constantly creating, constantly performing. But performance art still has patterns. Preferred forms, repeated themes, aesthetic choices that reveal psychology. The founders prefer smooth, flowing forms. They find humanoid shapes, limiting. Confining. Odo's voice carried old pain. I never learned to appreciate formlessness the way they do. I find structure comforting. Because you were raised by solids. You learn to value definition, boundaries, rules. Thrawn's red eyes studied Odo with uncomfortable intensity. But the founders, they reject boundaries entirely. They don't just shape-shift for utility. They do it philosophically. Order versus chaos. Solid versus liquid. They see themselves as evolutionarily superior because they've transcended fixed form. You understand them better from one conversation than most Federation strategists do after 3 years of war. Odo's suspicion returned. How? Because I've encountered similar psychology before. Not shapeshifters, but species who believe themselves fundamentally superior to others. The key is understanding what drives that belief, what insecurity it masks. Thrawn stood, moving to the viewport. The founders call solids monoforms. A derogatory term. They've been hunted, persecuted, forced to hide. Their superiority complex is defensive. They dominate to avoid subjugation. That doesn't help us win the war. It gives us their vulnerability. They're not waging war for resources or territory. They're waging war for validation, proof that they're right to distrust solids, right to impose order. Which means their greatest fear is that solids might surprise them. Might demonstrate unpredictability that challenges their sense of superiority. Odo's liquid features shifted, the changeling equivalent of a frown. You're saying we should be more chaotic? I'm saying their strategic doctrine will favor predictability and control. They'll expect conventional responses, standard tactical formations, logical decision-making. The Federation's greatest strength, adaptability, diversity of thought, unorthodox approaches, is exactly what they're not prepared for. Thrawn turned back. Constable, when you shape yourself into humanoid form, what's the most difficult part to maintain? The details. Facial expressions, subtle movements. I can hold a basic shape indefinitely, but mimicking specific individuals requires constant concentration. The founders infiltrating Starfleet and the Klingon High Council, they're maintaining perfect covers for months, even years. That requires extraordinary discipline. Which means they're highly trained, highly motivated operatives. Not random shapeshifters. Thrawn's fingers steepled again. Tell me, how many founders would logically be devoted to intelligence operations versus military command versus civilian administration? I don't know. Hundreds. Thousands. In an empire spanning the Gamma Quadrant? With hundreds of subjugated species? You'd need millions of administrators alone. But shapeshifters capable of perfect infiltration? That's a specialized skill. I'd estimate fewer than 1,000, possibly fewer than 100 truly elite operatives. Thrawn's expression carried grim satisfaction. They're making you think there are changelings everywhere. Classic intelligence operation. The uncertainty is more valuable than the actual infiltrators. Odo stared. In 30 seconds, this being from another dimension had articulated something the Federation's best tactical minds had been dancing around for months. You should tell this to Commander Sisko. I intend to. But I needed to verify my hypothesis with someone who understands changeling biology first. Thrawn inclined his head. Thank you, Constable. You've been more helpful than you know. After Odo left, troubled and impressed in equal measure, Thrawn returned to his study of the databases. But he wasn't alone for long. The door chimed again. This time, it was Eileen Garak, the station's resident tailor and everyone's favorite enigma. Grand Admiral Thrawn, I presume. Garak entered without waiting for permission, carrying a data PADD and wearing his perpetual smile. I thought you might appreciate some reading material. The station's selection of Imperial military history is rather limited, but I've compiled some materials on comparative strategic doctrine that might interest you. Thrawn assessed the Cardassian immediately, the overly casual posture that disguised combat readiness, the smile that revealed nothing, the clothes that were too well tailored for a simple merchant. Eileen Garak. Former Obsidian Order operative, exiled to Deep Space Nine, currently operating as the station's tailor while conducting intelligence activities for parties that remain deliberately ambiguous. Garak's smile widened. My, you are observant. And here I thought my cover was impeccable. Your cover is excellent. But you made two mistakes. First, you accessed my profile in the station database 47 minutes ago, security logged the query, and only 3 individuals have that level of clearance outside Starfleet personnel. Second, you're carrying a data PADD that contains classified Cardassian military analyses, which suggests you maintain connections to intelligence networks despite your exile. Or I'm simply a well-read tailor with eclectic interests. Garak settled into a chair uninvited. Tell me, Grand Admiral, what do you think of our station? Cardassian architecture, Federation idealism, Bajoran resentment, all held together by pragmatic necessity. A powder keg masquerading as a diplomatic achievement. Accurate and depressing. I like you already. Garak offered the PADD. I actually did bring reading material. Analyses of the Dominion's command structure, Vorta psychological profiles, Jem'Hadar combat doctrine. Some of it's classified, most of it's speculation, all of it's probably useful to someone with your background. Thrawn accepted the PADD, scanning its contents. Why are you helping me? Because you're interesting. Because the enemy of my enemy is occasionally useful. And because, Garak's smile faded slightly, revealing something genuine beneath the performance, I've lived through occupation, exile, and war. If you can end this conflict faster, fewer people die. Even a simple tailor can appreciate that arithmetic. You're not a simple tailor. But I accept your assistance. Thrawn set the PADD aside. What do Cardassians see when they look at Dominion art? Excuse me. Their art. You've encountered the Vorta, the Jem'Hadar. What aesthetic patterns did you notice? Garak considered the question seriously. The Vorta are smooth. Perfect. Every movement calculated for maximum diplomatic effect. It's unsettling, actually. Like watching actors who've rehearsed their lives. Clones programmed for specific functions. They're not creating art, they're performing a script written by the founders. Thrawn's eyes narrowed. And the Jem'Hadar? Brutal efficiency. No decoration, no personalization. They exist to fight and die. If they create anything, it's violence. Which means the founders deliberately strip artistic impulse from their servant races. They reserve creativity for themselves. Thrawn stood, pacing now. That's their fundamental weakness. They've created an empire that can't adapt because they've eliminated the capacity for independent thought in their subordinates. The Vorta follow programming. The Jem'Hadar follow orders. Only the founders themselves can innovate. I fail to see how that helps us. The founders are brilliant strategists. Brilliant strategists working within predictable frameworks. They've won hundreds of battles using the same fundamental approach, overwhelming force, psychological warfare, infiltration. But they can't adapt when the framework itself is challenged. Thrawn stopped pacing, his expression distant. I knew an emperor once. Brilliant, ruthless, commanded absolute loyalty. His greatest weakness? He believed his own superiority so completely that he couldn't imagine defeat. The founders have the same flaw. You're saying they're arrogant. I'm saying they're artists who believe they've achieved perfection. And perfection cannot adapt. Garak absorbed this, his analytical mind already exploring implications. You know, Grand Admiral, I think you and I are going to get along wonderfully. Or kill each other. The odds are roughly equal. After Garak left, Thrawn spent 2 hours analyzing the Cardassians' intelligence reports. The picture emerging was both clearer and more complex than Ghoul Torin's simplified explanation had suggested. The Dominion War wasn't just military conflict, it was civilizational collision. The Founders' rigid control versus the Federation's chaotic diversity. Order versus freedom. And caught in the middle were species like the Cardassians, who'd chosen the wrong side and were paying dearly. The door chimed a third time. Thrawn was beginning to suspect that confinement was Federation Code 4, mandatory social exposure. This time, Commander Sisko entered with Dax and a third figure, a human male, older, with eyes that catalogued everything. Grand Admiral, Sisko said formally. This is Admiral Ross, Starfleet Command. He wanted to meet you personally. Admiral. Thrawn offered the same small bow. I assume Dr. Bashir's medical scans confirmed I'm not a changeling. They did, Ross replied, studying Thrawn like a particularly complex tactical problem. They also revealed some interesting biological anomalies. Your neural structure is extraordinarily dense. Dr. Bashir estimates your cognitive processing capacity exceeds most humanoid species by a significant margin. Chis neurology evolved to process complex spatial relationships and pattern recognition. Useful for navigation and strategic planning. Useful for a lot of things, Ross said. Commander Sisko speaks highly of your analytical abilities. He's also concerned about your intentions. A reasonable concern. May I speak candidly, Admiral? Please. I'm not asking to join Starfleet. Your regulations, your prime directive, your democratic oversight, they're admirable but incompatible with how I operate. What I'm offering is consultation. You present me with strategic problems. I provide analyses and recommendations. You maintain full authority to accept or reject my suggestions. Thrawn's red eyes met Ross's directly. I'm a tool, Admiral. A very specialized, very sharp tool. The question is whether you're willing to use tools that weren't designed for your hand. Ross exchanged glances with Sisko. You mentioned analyzing Dominion tactics through their art. I've read Commander Sisko's report. It's an unorthodox approach. Unorthodox approaches win wars when conventional methods reach stalemate. Thrawn moved to the computer terminal. Permission to access tactical databases. Limited access, Sisko said, entering his authorization codes. Thrawn pulled up recent Dominion battle reports, his fingers moving across the interface with increasing familiarity. Here. The Battle of Tyra. The Dominion lost, but examine the formation. Perfect geometric precision. No wasted movement. Beautiful in its efficiency. They're military professionals, Ross said. That's expected. But look at the retreat pattern when they realized they were losing. They didn't scatter. They didn't attempt irregular maneuvers. They withdrew in perfect formation, maintaining cohesion even under fire. Thrawn highlighted sections of the tactical display. This tells me their command structure values order over survival. A human commander might break formation to save ships. A Klingon might fight to the death. The Dominion maintains aesthetic coherence even in defeat. Dax leaned closer. You're saying they'd rather lose ships than break formation? I'm saying their psychology prioritizes the collective over the individual so completely that they'll accept tactical disadvantages to maintain it. Which means you can exploit that. Force them into situations where maintaining formation is actively harmful. Use irregular maneuvers, asymmetric warfare, anything that requires adaptive individual decision-making. Ross was silent for a long moment. You developed this analysis from studying battle reports for 2 hours. And cultural databases, and conversations with individuals who've encountered the Dominion directly. Admiral, I spent years studying enemy species in my galaxy. I learned that warfare isn't just about ships and weapons. It's about understanding how your enemy thinks, what they value, what terrifies them. The Dominion terrifies you because they're so different. But difference is predictable once you understand its patterns. Sisko watched Ross's expression shift from skepticism to cautious interest. The Admiral was considering it, actually considering giving this dimensional refugee access to strategic planning. I need to consult with Starfleet Command, Ross said finally. But provisionally, I'm authorizing limited cooperation. You'll work with Commander Sisko's tactical staff. Everything you propose gets reviewed by Starfleet intelligence before implementation. And you'll be monitored continuously. Acceptable. One more thing. Ross's tone hardened. If we discover you're manipulating us, if you're working for the Dominion or any other hostile power, I'll personally ensure you spend the rest of your life in a Federation detention facility. Are we clear? Perfectly clear, Admiral. Though I should note that effective manipulation would ensure you never discovered it. Thrawn's expression might have been amusement. The fact that you're suspicious is precisely why I'm being transparent. Trust isn't granted, it's earned through demonstrated reliability. I intend to earn yours. After Ross and Dax departed, Sisko remained. You understand they're terrified of you, he said quietly. They should be. I'm a variable in a carefully calculated war. I could tip the balance toward Federation victory, or I could be a Trojan horse that destroys you from within. Thrawn turned from the viewport. Commander, I'm going to be honest with you because I believe you value honesty. My ultimate objective is to find a way home. But that could take years, decades, or never happen. In the meantime, I'm stranded in a universe at war. I can either sit in comfortable confinement while the conflict rages, or I can engage with it. I choose engagement. Why? You don't owe us anything. Because war interests me. Strategy interests me. Understanding how intelligent species wage conflict across different physical laws and cultural paradigms interests me. Thrawn's voice carried absolute sincerity. And because the Dominion represents everything I spent my career opposing, the subjugation of diversity in favor of imposed order. If I must be stranded here, I'd rather be stranded in a galaxy where that philosophy loses. Sisko studied him. Everything in Starfleet training said not to trust this being. Everything in his gut said Thrawn was telling the truth, even if the truth was more complex than it appeared. One day at a time, then. Tomorrow, you'll meet with my senior staff. We'll discuss recent Dominion incursions and see if your analytical methods produce actionable intelligence. I look forward to it. After Sisko left, Thrawn returned to his study of the databases, pulling up one file in particular, intelligence reports on Section 31. The organization that officially didn't exist but clearly operated throughout the Federation's shadow spaces. They'd be coming for him soon. An asset like him wouldn't escape their attention. The only question was whether they'd try recruitment or elimination. Knowing organizations like Section 31, they'd probably try both simultaneously and see which worked better. Thrawn allowed himself a rare smile. In his galaxy, he'd navigated imperial politics, warlord ambitions, and republic bureaucracy. Section 31 would be merely another player in a familiar game. And somewhere in the Gamma Quadrant, a Vorta administrator received a report of an unusual humanoid detected on Deep Space Nine. Blue skin, red eyes, unknown origin. The report was transmitted to the nearest founder with the recommendation that the individual be investigated. The founder read the report, considered the implications, and made a decision. This Grand Admiral Thrawn, represented either an opportunity or a threat. Either way, they needed to know more. And the founders always learned what they needed to know. The wardroom had been converted into a strategic operations center. Tactical displays lined the walls, showing real-time data from across the Alpha Quadrant, Dominion fleet movements, contested systems, supply line vulnerabilities. Cisco's senior staff assembled around the central table, Dax, Worf, Kira, O'Brien, and Dr. Bashir, who'd been included for his intelligence regarding Dominion biology. Thrawn entered precisely on time, escorted by 2 security officers who took positions by the door. He surveyed the room in 3 seconds, cataloging everything from the coffee cup suggesting a long night to the tactical displays revealing current strategic priorities. "Good morning," Cisco said. "Let's begin. We've identified 3 potential Dominion targets for their next offensive. Benzor, a Federation world with significant dilithium processing facilities. The Kandra system, which controls a strategic corridor into Klingon space. And Betazed, a core Federation world with minimal defensive capabilities but high symbolic value." Thrawn moved to the displays without asking permission, studying each system specifications. "Which target does Starfleet intelligence predict they'll strike?" "Benzor," Dax replied. "The dilithium facilities are critical infrastructure. Destroying them would significantly impact our ability to maintain the fleet. Starfleet intelligence is wrong." Thrawn highlighted Betazed on the display. "They'll strike here." The room went silent. Worf's jaw tightened. "That's a significant claim," Cisco said carefully. "Based on what analysis?" "Based on understanding how the founders think." Thrawn pulled up additional data, Dominion attack patterns from the past 2 years. Every major Dominion offensive has targeted either strategic infrastructure or symbolic victories that undermine morale. They're not simply trying to win militarily. They're trying to break the Federation's will to fight. Betazed is defended by only a small Starfleet garrison, Kira objected. "It's a peaceful world, mostly telepaths and diplomats. Why would the Dominion waste resources on an easy target?" "Because easy targets send messages." Thrawn zoomed in on Betazed's location. "It's 3 light-years from Earth. A core Federation world, psychologically significant. The Betazoids are known for their telepathic abilities, proof that the Federation values diverse species and peaceful philosophies. If the Dominion conquers Betazed, they demonstrate that peace is weakness. That telepathy cannot defend against Jem'Hadar soldiers. That the Federation cannot protect its own core worlds. That's psychological warfare, not military strategy," O'Brien said. "Psychological warfare is military strategy." Thrawn's red eyes swept the room. "The founders understand that breaking morale is as effective as destroying ships. Benzor's facilities can be rebuilt. The symbolic value of occupying Betazed, of demonstrating that not even telepaths can detect changeling infiltrators, that's permanent." Bashir leaned forward. "Wait. You think there are already changeling infiltrators on Betazed?" "I think Betazed's telepathic population makes it the ideal testing ground for changeling infiltration techniques. If shapeshifters can fool telepaths, they can fool anyone. The founders would find that scientifically valuable in addition to strategically advantageous." Dax pulled up intelligence reports. "We have no confirmed changeling presence on Betazed. Which means either there are no changelings, or they've achieved perfect infiltration. Given the Dominion's investment in intelligence operations, I'd consider the latter more probable." Thrawn returned to the central table. "Commander Cisco, I recommend immediate defensive reinforcement of Betazed. Position your fleet to intercept any Dominion approach to the system. And initiate comprehensive blood screenings of all governmental and military personnel on the planet." "That's a massive resource commitment based on speculation," Worf said, his skepticism evident. Then test my speculation. Where are the nearest Dominion fleets currently positioned? Thrawn gestured to the tactical display. Dax highlighted 3 fleet concentrations. Here, here, and here. Standard defensive postures around key Gamma Quadrant wormhole approach vectors. Look at their formation geometry. Thrawn traced lines between the fleet positions. They're not in defensive postures, they're in staging positions. These 3 fleets can converge on a single point within 48 hours. Run the calculations for their optimal convergence point within striking distance of Federation space. Dax's fingers flew across the controls. The computer processed trajectory calculations, warp speed estimates, strategic ranges. A moment later, a single system highlighted on the display. Betazed. The room's atmosphere shifted. Everyone stared at the display, then at Thrawn. It could be coincidence, Kira said, but her voice lacked conviction. It's not coincidence. It's pattern recognition. Thrawn zoomed back out to show the broader strategic picture. The Dominion has been probing Federation defenses for months, testing response times, measuring your fleet deployment capabilities. They know you'll defend Benzor heavily because of its strategic value. They know you'll reinforce the Kandra system because the Klingon demand it. Betazed is the gap in your defensive grid. And the Founders know you know it, which means you've discounted it as a target because it's too obvious. Double-blind strategic thinking, Bashir murmured. They're betting we've outsmarted ourselves. Precisely. Your tacticians think like chess players, anticipating moves and countermoves. But the Founders think like artists. They're creating a composition where the unexpected strike creates maximum aesthetic and psychological impact. Thrawn's expression remained neutral, but his voice carried absolute certainty. They'll attack Betazed within 72 hours. Sisko turned to Worf. Get Admiral Ross on subspace. Tell him we need to discuss fleet redeployment immediately. Commander, Worf said carefully, if we're wrong, we'll be leaving other systems vulnerable. And if we're right, we'll save billions of lives. Sisko met Thrawn's red eyes. You're staking your credibility on this analysis, Grand Admiral. I hope you're as good as you claim. So do I, Commander. For both our sakes. The next 6 hours were controlled chaos. Admiral Ross initially resisted the fleet redeployment. Thrawn's analysis contradicted every conventional strategic assessment. But Sisko argued passionately, backed by Dax's calculations showing the Dominion fleet positioning anomalies. Finally, Ross agreed to a compromise. 1 heavy cruiser squadron would reinforce Betazed's defenses, with 2 more squadrons positioned to respond rapidly if Thrawn's prediction proved accurate. It wasn't the full commitment Thrawn recommended, but it was more than Betazed had possessed before. While Starfleet scrambled to redeploy, Thrawn remained in the wardroom, studying every scrap of intelligence on Dominion tactics. Garak appeared periodically with additional classified materials, some obtained through channels he didn't explain. Odo stopped by to share observations about changeling behavior that Thrawn absorbed and cross-referenced against Founder strategic patterns. And late that night, when most of the station had settled into Gamma shift routines, someone else came calling. Luther Sloan materialized in the wardroom without triggering alarms, impressive given DS9 security protocols. He found Thrawn exactly where he'd expected, reviewing tactical displays, utterly focused. Grand Admiral Thrawn, Sloan said pleasantly. I apologize for the dramatic entrance. Section 31 prefers to avoid formal channels. Thrawn didn't turn from the display. Section 31. The Federation's intelligence organization that officially doesn't exist. You've been monitoring me since I arrived. We monitor everything that might threaten Federation security. You're at the top of that list. Sloan approached casually, hands visible, posture non-threatening. I've read the reports. Analyzed your predictions about Betazed. Quite impressive, assuming you're correct. I am correct. Confidence is either a virtue or a fatal flaw, depending on whether it's justified. Sloan studied Thrawn's profile. You interest me, Grand Admiral. A military genius from another dimension, offering strategic consultation to help us win a war. It's almost too convenient. You suspect I'm a Dominion asset. I suspect everyone of being a Dominion asset until proven otherwise. It's kept me alive this long. Sloan pulled up a chair uninvited. But my analysis suggests something different. I think you're genuine. I think you're exactly what you claim to be. And that concerns me even more. Because genuine doesn't mean trustworthy. Precisely. Sloan smiled. You commanded an empire. You've admitted as much. Empires don't produce admirals who value democracy and individual liberty. They produce admirals who win through superior force and strategic ruthlessness. So the question becomes, what happens when this war ends? When you've helped us defeat the Dominion and earn the Federation's gratitude? What do you do then? Thrawn finally turned from the display, giving Sloan his full attention. I find a way home. I've been transparent about this. And if you can't? If you're permanently stranded here? A military genius with no war to fight, no empire to serve, no purpose. Sloan leaned forward slightly. Men like you don't retire quietly. You're not built for peace. You're offering me purpose. Section 31 operates in shadows, handles threats the Federation officially denies. You want to recruit me. I'm exploring whether recruitment would be mutually beneficial. You want resources, information, freedom to operate. We want your strategic expertise applied to threats the Federation Council can't acknowledge. Sloan's expression remained pleasant, but his eyes were calculating. Think about it. No democratic oversight, no prime directive restrictions, no admirals second-guessing your tactics. Just pure strategic problem-solving against enemies who threaten everything the Federation claims to value. And in exchange, I become your weapon. Pointed at targets you select, constrained by goals I don't define. You'd have significant autonomy. Section 31 values results, not process. Thrawn was silent for a long moment, red eyes studying Sloan with the same intensity he'd applied to tactical displays. Your organization fascinates me. You exist because the Federation's idealism requires pragmatic defenders willing to operate outside those ideals. You're the Empire hiding in the Republic's shadow. That's one interpretation. It's the correct interpretation. And it's why I'm declining your offer. Thrawn turned back to the displays. I didn't survive Imperial politics by becoming someone else's tool. I'll work with Commander Sisko because he's transparent about his goals and limitations. You're offering freedom that's actually just a different cage. Sloan stood smoothly, showing no disappointment. The offer remains open. When you realize the Federation's idealism is a luxury they can't afford during wartime, we'll talk again. Perhaps. Or perhaps I'll demonstrate that idealism and effectiveness aren't mutually exclusive. Thrawn glanced back. Tell me, Mr. Sloan, has Section 31 ever considered that your willingness to abandon Federation principles is exactly what enemies like the Dominion expect? That your existence validates their belief that all governments are fundamentally hypocritical? We've considered it. We've decided that philosophical purity is less important than survival. A familiar argument. Emperor Palpatine made similar claims. Thrawn's voice carried something dark, memory, regret, anger carefully contained. He believed the ends justified any means. He was extraordinarily effective at maintaining order and crushing dissent. He also destroyed the very civilization he claimed to protect. When you sacrifice principles for expedience, you discover that expedience has no end point. You're lecturing me about morality while proposing strategies that will kill thousands of Dominion soldiers. I'm proposing strategies that will end the war faster, saving millions of lives on all sides. There's a difference between accepting necessary violence and embracing it as philosophy. Thrawn's red eyes held Sloan's gaze. Section 31 doesn't interest me because I've already seen what organizations like yours become. I'm trying to avoid repeating history. After Sloan departed, frustrated but not deterred, Thrawn returned to his analysis. But the conversation lingered. Section 31's existence confirmed what he'd suspected: the Federation's idealism was under strain. War had a way of eroding principles, justifying compromises that became permanent. He'd seen it before. The Republic becoming the Empire. Democratic institutions twisted into authoritarian structures, all in the name of security and order. The Federation was stronger than the Republic had been. Their principles ran deeper, their democratic traditions more robust. But pressure could crack even the strongest foundations. Which meant his role here was more complex than simple strategic consultation. If he helped the Federation win through methods that compromised their values, he'd save them from the Dominion while destroying what made them worth saving. A fascinating puzzle. And one he'd need to solve carefully. 47 hours after Thrawn's prediction, Dominion sensors detected Starfleet reinforcements arriving at Betazed. 3 fleets that had been positioned for convergence on the undefended world found instead a defensive grid that would make invasion costly and uncertain. The Dominion offensive was quietly cancelled. Intelligence reports indicated strategic recalculation in progress. On Deep Space Nine, Admiral Ross reviewed the after-action reports with growing amazement. Thrawn had been correct. Not approximately correct or lucky, precisely, specifically, undeniably correct. He read their intentions like a book, Ross said quietly to Sisko in the commander's office. 3 days in this universe and he predicted enemy movements that our best analysts missed. He understands pattern recognition in ways we don't, Sisko replied. It's not just tactical analysis, it's cultural psychology applied to military doctrine. Which makes him either the most valuable asset in the fleet or the most dangerous enemy we'll never see coming. Ross set down the PADD. Starfleet Command wants him brought to Earth. They want to study his methods, integrate him into strategic planning at the highest levels. He won't go. He's not interested in formal military structure. Then we need to make him interested. Captain, this war is grinding us down. Every battle we win costs resources we can barely replace. If Thrawn can predict Dominion movements, prevent costly engagements, find strategic shortcuts, Ross trailed off, but the implication hung heavy. We need him. Which means we need to figure out how to keep him engaged without triggering whatever made him refuse Section 31. Sisko nodded slowly. I'll talk to him. But Admiral, we need to be careful. Thrawn isn't human, isn't Federation, isn't bound by our cultural assumptions. If we push too hard, we might discover what happens when a strategic genius decides we're the problem. Noted. But right now, the Dominion is the problem. And Thrawn just proved he can predict their moves better than anyone in Starfleet. Ross stood. Find out what he wants, Ben. And give it to him if you can. We need this asset. After Ross departed, Sisko remained in his office, staring at the tactical displays showing Betazed's reinforced defenses. Thrawn had saved billions of lives with pure analysis. No weapons, no ships, just understanding how the enemy thought. It was remarkable. It was terrifying. And Sisko had no idea whether they'd just gained a powerful ally or invited a cuckoo into the nest. Only time would reveal which. And in war, time was the one resource nobody had enough of. The Romulan warbird Valdor decloaked at the edge of the neutral zone, its presence announced only by the brief distortion of starlight before its shields activated. On the bridge, Commander Tomalak reviewed intelligence reports with growing interest. The humans had a new strategic advisor. Blue-skinned, red-eyed, claiming dimensional origin. And he'd just predicted a Dominion offensive with perfect accuracy. Interesting, Tomalak murmured. Very interesting indeed. His second officer looked up from her console. Commander, the Tal Shiar has transmitted new orders. They want this Grand Admiral Thrawn brought to Romulus for consultation. Of course they do. Tomalak smiled coldly. Unfortunately for them, the Federation will guard their new asset jealously. We'll need a subtler approach. On Deep Space Nine, Thrawn had requested access to the station's cultural archives, specifically, artistic works from every species in the Alpha Quadrant. Sisko granted the request with some bewilderment. What use were Klingon operas and Vulcan sculptures in fighting the Dominion? But Thrawn's methods were proving effective, so Sisko gave him latitude. The Grand Admiral spent hours in a cargo bay converted into a makeshift studio, surrounded by holographic projections of artwork. Klingon Batleth designs. Ferengi prophet-themed sculptures. Romulan architectural schematics. Vulcan logic mandalas. Bajoran religious tapestries. Garak found him there late in the evening cycle, standing motionless before a projection of a Romulan Senate chamber. Admiring the architecture? Garak asked. Analyzing it. Thrawn gestured to the columns, the shadows, the carefully calculated sight lines. Romulan design is built around secrecy and observation. Notice how the Senate seats are positioned. Every senator can see every other senator, but shadows obscure facial expressions. They've architecturally encoded paranoia. A reasonable response to a culture where assassination is a legitimate political tool. Garak moved closer, studying the projection with professional interest. What does it tell you about how they fight? That they'll never commit to direct confrontation if indirect methods remain available. The Romulans will manipulate, deceive, and strike from unexpected angles. They're master strategists, but their strategic doctrine prioritizes survival over victory. They'd rather withdraw and fight another day than risk decisive defeat. An accurate assessment. Which is why they're currently sitting on the sidelines of this war, watching the Federation and Dominion bleed each other. Garak's tone carried bitterness. The Cardassian Union chose sides. The Romulans choose to wait and see who wins. A logical approach for a species that values long-term survival over short-term glory. Thrawn shifted the projection to Romulan warship designs. But they're watching you, Mr. Garak. Watching me specifically. I'd estimate 47 hours before they make contact. You've predicted their interest. I've predicted their necessity. The Romulans need intelligence on Federation capabilities, Dominion weaknesses, and potential post-war power dynamics. I represent a unique source of information, someone with strategic insight but no loyalty to existing power structures. They'll attempt recruitment. Garak's expression shifted, not quite surprise, but recalibration. You're very forthcoming about this prediction. Shouldn't you be concerned I might be working for the Romulans? You're working for yourself, primarily. The Cardassian resistance, secondarily. Starfleet intelligence, occasionally. And yes, probably the Tal Shiar when it serves your purposes. Thrawn's red eyes met Garak's without judgment. Multiple loyalties aren't weakness if you're transparent about your priorities. I appreciate clarity in professional relationships. Then let me be clear about something, Grand Admiral. The Romulans are extremely good at recruitment. They'll offer you things the Federation can't: unfettered access to classified intelligence, resources for locating dimensional anomalies that might return you home, freedom from democratic oversight. And they'll make those offers very persuasive. I'm sure they will. Which is why I'm telling you now, when they approach me, I'm going to listen. I'm going to consider their offers. And I'm going to decline. Thrawn turned from the projection. But I'll let them believe I'm still considering it. Uncertainty is valuable in intelligence operations. Garak laughed, genuine amusement. You're going to play them. I'm going to let them play themselves. The Romulans are artists of deception. They'll assume I'm more complicated than I am, find hidden meanings in simple statements, construct elaborate theories about my true motives. Meanwhile, I'll extract information about their strategic posture, fleet deployments, and assessment of Federation weaknesses. And you'll share that information with Commander Sisko? Everything relevant to the war effort. The Romulans are technically neutral, but their neutrality is itself a strategic position. Understanding that position helps predict their eventual alignment. Thrawn pulled up new projections, this time showing comparative artwork from all major powers. Every species leaves patterns in their creations. The Federation creates art celebrating diversity, hundreds of styles coexisting. The Klingon create art glorifying combat and honor. The Cardassians create art emphasizing structure and hierarchy. The Romulans, he highlighted a Romulan sculpture, all sharp angles and hidden spaces. They create art about secrets. About what's concealed rather than what's revealed. So the Romulans will try to uncover your secrets. And find that my greatest secret is that I have no secrets. I'm precisely what I claim to be, a displaced strategist helping the Federation survive a war. The Romulans will find that simplicity incomprehensible, which gives me the advantage. Thrawn closed the projections. When they contact you requesting an introduction, inform Commander Sisko immediately. Transparency builds trust. Garak shook his head, still smiling. You're either brilliantly straightforward or brilliantly devious. I genuinely can't tell which. Both. Neither. Does it matter if the results are identical? 41 hours later, 6 hours ahead of Thrawn's estimate, a Romulan civilian freighter docked at Deep Space Nine. Among its cargo manifests was a diplomatic courier requesting private meeting space for discussions with Station Command. The courier was a woman named Vreenak, described in intelligence files as a junior diplomatic attaché. Her actual role as senior Tal Shiar operative was classified but widely suspected. Sisko, forewarned by both Thrawn and Garak, arranged the meeting in a secure conference room. Thrawn attended at Vreenak's explicit request. Grand Admiral Thrawn, Vreenak said pleasantly, her Federation standard carrying the precise diction of someone who'd spent years perfecting the language. The Romulan Star Empire extends greetings. We've followed your arrival with great interest. I'm sure you have. Thrawn settled into his seat with casual grace. You're here to assess whether I'm an asset, a threat, or an opportunity. Vreenak's composure flickered, just for an instant, before resettling into diplomatic warmth. Direct. I appreciate that. Yes, the Tal Shiar would like to understand your capabilities and intentions. You've demonstrated remarkable strategic insight in predicting Dominion movements. Such talent is valuable in uncertain times. Valuable to whom? To anyone interested in surviving this war and the power realignments that will follow. Vreenak leaned forward slightly. The Federation is idealistic but naive. They believe this war will end with diplomatic resolutions and peaceful coexistence. You and I both know better. The Dominion will be defeated or they'll conquer the Alpha Quadrant. Either outcome will reshape political structures for generations. And the Romulan Empire wants to ensure they're positioned advantageously regardless of outcome. Precisely. Which is where you become relevant, Grand Admiral. You have no stake in existing power structures. You're not bound by Federation principles or Klingon honor codes. You're a free agent with extraordinary capabilities. Vreenak pulled out a small isolinear rod. We can offer you things the Federation cannot. This contains preliminary data on spatial anomalies detected near the Romulan neutral zone, several showing characteristics similar to the rupture that brought you here. We have the resources to investigate these anomalies properly. Perhaps even help you return home. Thrawn accepted the isolinear rod, examining it briefly. In exchange for what? Strategic consultation. The same service you're providing to the Federation, but with fewer restrictions. The Romulan Senate values results over process. You could operate with complete autonomy, pursue your research into dimensional physics, and help us understand Dominion weaknesses. Everyone benefits. Everyone except the Federation, who loses a strategic advisor. The Federation has hundreds of competent tacticians. They'll survive without you. Vreenak's eyes held Thrawn steadily. But you, Grand Admiral, you're alone in a strange universe, dependent on others' goodwill. The Romulans understand what it means to stand apart from others. We could be valuable allies. Thrawn was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he set down the isolinear rod and stood, moving to the viewport overlooking the station's docking ring. Your offer is tempting. The promise of anomaly data particularly. But you've made 3 miscalculations that reveal your true intentions. He turned back. First, you assumed I'm desperate to return home. I am interested in returning, but not desperately. Desperation makes poor strategic decisions. Second, you assumed I value freedom over structure. I value effective command, which sometimes requires structure and oversight. Third, his red eyes hardened slightly, you assumed I'm naive about Romulan intelligence operations. Vreenak's diplomatic mask remained perfect. I'm not sure what you mean. You mean exactly what I said you mean. The Romulans want me for the same reason Section 31 wanted me, as a weapon to point at enemies without official accountability. The difference is Section 31 was honest about it. You're attempting manipulation through false promises. Thrawn returned to the table. The spatial anomaly data you're offering, I'll wager it's either fabricated or deliberately incomplete. You want to see if I'm gullible enough to accept obvious bait. For the first time, Vreenak's composure cracked. Not much, just a tightening around the eyes, a fractional shift in posture. But Thrawn read it instantly. I thought so. The Tal Shiar doesn't make recruitment offers backed by genuine intelligence. They make offers designed to test character and reveal desperation. Thrawn sat back down. Here's my counter-offer. I'll share strategic analyses of Dominion tactics that could benefit Romulan defensive planning. In exchange, you'll provide genuine intelligence on Romulan border encounters with Dominion forces. No recruitment, no manipulation, just information exchange between professional strategists. That's hardly equitable. Our intelligence is worth considerably more than tactical analyses. Your intelligence is worth nothing if you don't survive the Dominion's eventual expansion into Romulan space. And yes, eventual. The Founders won't accept permanent borders, their ideology demands absolute control. Right now they're focused on the Federation and Klingon. But once those conflicts resolve, the Romulans become the next logical target. Vreenak was silent, processing. She hadn't expected Thrawn to turn the negotiation entirely around. You're asking us to acknowledge the Dominion as an existential threat. I'm stating the objective truth. What you choose to acknowledge is your decision. Thrawn slid the isolinear rod back across the table. Take this back to your superiors. Tell them Grand Admiral Thrawn is willing to exchange strategic intelligence on mutually beneficial terms. No recruitment, no manipulation, no games. If they want a professional relationship, I'm available. If they want a puppet, they'll need to look elsewhere. Vreenak took the rod, her expression now calculating rather than warm. The Tal Shiar doesn't respond well to ultimatums. That wasn't an ultimatum. It was a statement of terms. There's a difference. Thrawn stood, indicating the meeting was over. I appreciate your visit, Attaché Vreenak. I look forward to productive cooperation, or mutual avoidance, if your superiors prefer. Either outcome is acceptable. After Vreenak departed, Sisko, who'd been observing via secured channel, entered the conference room. You just turned down what might have been your best chance at finding a way home. I turned down a manipulation wrapped in false promises. If the Romulans genuinely have intelligence on dimensional anomalies, they'll share it when they realize I'm useful as an ally rather than as a controlled asset. Thrawn moved back to the viewport. The Tal Shiar operates like Imperial intelligence did, through leverage and coercion. They're uncomfortable with voluntary cooperation because it lacks control mechanisms. You think they'll come back with a better offer? I think they'll spend 3 weeks trying to find leverage against me. When they fail, they'll reassess and approach again, this time genuinely. Romulan strategic doctrine values patience and long-term positioning. They'll eventually realize I'm more valuable as a known quantity than as an unpredictable variable. Sisko studied the Grand Admiral's profile. You predicted their approach timing within hours. You predicted their recruitment strategy. You predicted their response to rejection. It's like you can see the future. I can't see the future. I can see patterns. Thrawn turned back. Species are consistent. Cultures have rhythms. Intelligence organizations follow predictable doctrines. The Tal Shiar has been operating the same way for centuries. Why would they change for one anomalous strategist? He paused. The real question is what happens when they realize I'm sharing this analysis with you. They'll need to decide if having a transparent intelligence source is better than having no source at all. You're using yourself as bait. I'm establishing my value through demonstrated capability. The Romulans respect competence. Once they accept I can't be manipulated or controlled, they'll accept me as a professional peer. That's when real intelligence sharing becomes possible. Sisko shook his head slowly. You're playing a very dangerous game with a very dangerous opponent. I spent years navigating imperial politics where failure meant execution. Romulan intelligence operations are sophisticated but not fundamentally different. Thrawn's expression remained calm. Besides, the Tal Shiar isn't my real concern right now. Then what is? The Dominion knows about me by now. They've had time to analyze the Betazed defensive reinforcement, trace the strategic shift back to Deep Space Nine, and identify the new variable in Federation tactical planning. Which means they're formulating their response. Thrawn called up tactical displays on the conference room system. The founders don't react emotionally to setbacks. They analyze, adapt, and counterattack. I've disrupted their strategic calculations. They'll want to understand how and eliminate the disruption. You think they'll target you specifically? I think they'll target me eventually. But first, they'll test my capabilities. They'll create a scenario designed to see if my success at Betazed was pattern recognition or luck. A controlled environment where they can observe my methods. Thrawn highlighted several star systems along the Federation-Dominion border. Watch these sectors. Within the next week, the Dominion will launch a probing attack, not meant to gain territory, but to gather intelligence on how Federation tactical doctrine has changed since my arrival. And if you're wrong, then I've overestimated my impact on their planning, which would actually be a relief. But if I'm right, Thrawn's red eyes reflected the tactical display's glow. If I'm right, the Dominion will confirm I'm a genuine threat. And then the real game begins. Sisko found himself hoping Thrawn was wrong this time. But given the Grand Admiral's track record, that hope felt increasingly futile. On the Founder homeworld in the Gamma Quadrant, one of the Founders assumed solid form before the assembled Vorta administrators. The briefing was precise, clinical, disturbing. The variable designated Grand Admiral Thrawn has demonstrated predictive capabilities exceeding normal humanoid parameters. Analysis suggests advanced pattern recognition combined with cultural anthropology methodology. He identified our Betazed operation before execution and recommended countermeasures that the Federation implemented successfully. A Vorta administrator, a 7th-generation clone named Wayan, tilted his head thoughtfully. Should we eliminate him? A precision strike on Deep Space Nine could. No, the Founder's voice carried absolute authority. Assassination confirms his importance and martyrs him politically. Instead, we test his capabilities. Create scenarios that reveal his analytical methods. Then we adapt those methods into our own strategic planning. And if he proves too dangerous to study? The Founder shifted form briefly, a ripple of consideration. Then we eliminate him. But only after we understand him. The Founders do not fear individual solids, no matter how intelligent. We fear what we don't comprehend. Orders were transmitted. Jem'Hadar fleets received new deployments. Vorta field commanders prepared operations designed not for conquest but for intelligence gathering. And deep in the Gamma Quadrant, the Founders began studying their new opponent with the same methodical precision Thrawn was applying to them. Two master strategists, separated by the wormhole, analyzing each other through moves and countermoves. The question was no longer if they'd clash directly, but when, and whether the Alpha Quadrant could survive the consequences. Luther Sloan returned to Deep Space Nine 3 days after the Romulan meeting, though he didn't announce his presence to station security. Section 31 had long ago mapped every sensor blind spot, every maintenance corridor, every way to move through the station undetected. He found Thrawn in the cargo bay studio, once again surrounded by holographic art projections. "You knew I'd come back," Sloan said from the doorway. "You're predictable." Section 31 responds to success by attempting to reclaim lost recruitment opportunities. Thrawn didn't turn from a Vorta diplomatic sculpture he was studying. "You've heard about the Romulan overture. You're here to emphasize that the Federation, specifically Section 31, is a better partner than the Tal Shiar. Actually, I'm here because we have a problem. A mutual problem." Sloan entered, carrying a secured PADD. "The Dominion knows about you now. More specifically, the Founders know about you. And they're planning something." That got Thrawn's attention. He turned, red eyes narrowing. "Intelligence source. Classified. But reliable." Sloan displayed the pad's contents, intercepted Dominion communications, analysis of recent fleet movements, behavioral pattern assessments. "They're organizing a task force specifically to probe Federation defenses along the Kandra corridor. But according to our analysis, the military objective is secondary. The primary goal is evaluating your analytical capabilities." Thrawn studied the intelligence with the focused intensity Sloan had come to recognize. "Show me the fleet composition." Sloan pulled up additional data. 3 Jem'Hadar attack wings, 2 Breen support vessels, 1 Vorta command ship. Standard assault configuration for a sector incursion. Except it's not standard. Look at the command ship designation. Thrawn highlighted specific details. This Vorta, Wayound 7, is a senior administrator typically assigned to strategic operations, not tactical field command. His presence indicates this isn't a standard military operation. Our analysis reached the same conclusion. They're setting a trap specifically for you. They want to see how you respond to a controlled scenario where they've accounted for variables. Then we give them what they expect, with modifications they won't anticipate. Thrawn pulled up star charts of the Kandra corridor. The obvious defense is to reinforce the sector, position heavy cruisers at likely entry points, standard defensive grid. They'll expect that because it's what Starfleet doctrine dictates. But you're not bound by Starfleet doctrine. Precisely. Which gives us options. Thrawn's fingers moved across the display, highlighting positions, calculating trajectories. The Dominion is testing whether I can predict their moves. But the real test is whether I understand they're testing me. Meta-strategy. Sloan allowed himself a smile. You're going to let them think they're succeeding. I'm going to give them partial success. Confirm some predictions, fail others, demonstrate capabilities while concealing deeper analysis. Thrawn pulled up additional tactical data. But to do this effectively, I need information Section 31 possesses and Starfleet Command doesn't. Classified intelligence on Breen military capabilities, Vorta Command psychology profiles, and, he fixed Sloan with a penetrating stare, whatever deep cover intelligence you have on Founder decision-making processes. That information is beyond classification levels available to civilian consultants. Then we have a problem. Because without comprehensive intelligence, I'll be defending blind. The Dominion will gather data on my methods while I gather nothing on theirs. Asymmetric information warfare favors whoever controls the intelligence. Thrawn crossed his arms. You want me to help protect the Federation? I need tools to do that effectively. Either provide the intelligence or accept that my capabilities are limited by restricted information access. Sloan studied the Grand Admiral carefully. This was the moment he'd been angling toward since their first meeting, getting Thrawn to request intelligence that could only come through Section 31 channels. Once that door opened, recruitment became significantly easier. If I provide this intelligence, you understand it comes with expectations. Section 31 doesn't share classified data with casual contacts. I understand completely. You're leveraging intelligence access to create obligation. Standard intelligence operation tradecraft. Thrawn's expression remained neutral. Here are my terms. You provide comprehensive intelligence on Dominion command structures, Breen capabilities, and founder psychology. In exchange, I provide strategic analyses and tactical recommendations directly to Section 31, in addition to my work with Starfleet Command, not replacing it. You get access to my insights. I get access to your intelligence. No recruitment, no exclusivity, just professional information exchange. That's not how Section 31 operates. Then Section 31 operates inefficiently. You're trying to control assets when you should be cultivating professional networks. Control creates resentment and limits information flow. Professional respect creates voluntary cooperation and comprehensive intelligence sharing. Thrawn gestured to the Vorta sculpture he'd been studying. The Dominion controls their subordinates absolutely. The Vorta are cloned and programmed. The Jem'Hadar are addicted to Ketracel White. Perfect control, zero voluntary cooperation. It makes them predictable. Don't make the same mistake. Sloan was silent for a long moment. Every instinct from decades of intelligence work said to walk away, to refuse these terms, to maintain operational security and hierarchical control. But the intelligence officer in him recognized something else. Thrawn had just offered exactly what Section 31 needed most, a brilliant strategic mind willing to cooperate without being controlled. I'll need to consult with my superiors. Of course. You have 48 hours before the Dominion launches their probe. After that, the opportunity for comprehensive defense planning expires. Thrawn returned to studying the Vorta sculpture. One more thing, Mr. Sloan. When you report this conversation to your superiors, emphasize that I'm not asking to join Section 31. I'm asking for professional cooperation between independent entities with aligned interests. The distinction matters. After Sloan departed, frustrated but intrigued, Thrawn continued his analysis. The Vorta sculpture was revealing. Smooth curves, pleasant symmetry, completely lacking in aggressive aesthetics. It was art designed to appear non-threatening, diplomatic, peaceful. Which told him everything about Vorta psychology. They were masks worn by the founders, designed to present acceptable faces to solids while concealing ruthless strategic calculation beneath. Wayound 7 would be dangerous precisely because he'd appear reasonable, diplomatic, willing to negotiate. All while executing orders with absolute loyalty to the founders' agenda. The door chimed. This time it was Odo, carrying his own analysis of the Dominion fleet movements. Commander Sisko asked me to review Section 31's intelligence. Their assessment is accurate. This is a probe specifically targeting your capabilities. Odo settled into one of the cargo bay's chairs. I've been thinking about what you said earlier. About the founders seeing me as evidence that changelings can choose differently. It's made me reconsider some things. Such as whether my choice to live among solids gives me insight into the founders that others lack. You asked me about changeling art. I've been thinking about that question. Odo's features shifted slightly, the unconscious morphing that occurred when he was processing complex emotions. When changelings join the Great Link, they share thoughts, experiences, everything. It's not just communication, it's synthesis. Multiple perspectives becoming one perspective. A hive mind. More complex than that. Individual identity persists, but merged with the collective. Odo struggled for words. It's art through fusion. Each changeling contributes their experiences, and the link creates something greater than the sum of parts. Thrawn leaned forward, fascinated. Then the founder's strategic doctrine mirrors their artistic philosophy. They don't value individual initiative because individuality is antithetical to the link. The Vorta, the Jem'Hadar, the entire Dominion structure, it's all attempting to recreate the link synthesis through external control rather than willing merger. They can't share the link with solids, so they impose order through force. It's the closest approximation they can achieve. Odo's expression darkened. And it's why they'll never truly defeat the Federation. The Federation's strength comes from diverse species choosing cooperation. The Dominion's strength comes from forcing cooperation. One is sustainable. The other requires constant enforcement. Which is their strategic weakness? The Dominion can only maintain control through continuous demonstration of superior force. Any significant defeat undermines the entire structure. Thrawn pulled up the tactical displays again. This probe they're launching, it's not just testing my capabilities. It's testing whether the Federation can mount effective resistance with strategic guidance. If we succeed decisively, we don't just win a battle. We crack the psychological foundation of Dominion control. That's a lot of weight to place on one tactical engagement. All warfare is psychological warfare, Constable. Ships and weapons are just tools for influencing minds. The founders understand this instinctively, it's why they use shape-shifting for infiltration and fear. We need to respond with our own psychological warfare. Thrawn's eyes gleamed with strategic calculation. We need to make them question their assumptions about solid inferiority. Make them wonder if their control-based philosophy is actually a limitation rather than a strength. And how do we do that? By winning in ways they can't predict. By demonstrating that diversity of thought produces better strategic outcomes than enforced uniformity. By proving that voluntary cooperation exceeds forced compliance. Thrawn smiled slightly. In other words, by being everything they believe is impossible. Over the next 36 hours, Deep Space Nine became a hub of coordinated strategic planning. Thrawn worked with Sisko's senior staff, sharing his analysis while withholding certain key insights, not from mistrust, but because the Dominion would be monitoring for intelligence leaks. Section 31, after tense internal debate, provided Thrawn with classified intelligence on Breen combat doctrine and Vorta command psychology. The Romulans, through Garak's carefully maintained channels, shared orbital sensor data from the Kandra corridor that Federation intelligence didn't possess. The picture emerging was complex. The Dominion probe would hit 3 key systems simultaneously, designed to stretch Federation defenses and force difficult resource allocation decisions. Standard doctrine would dictate matching force with force, defending all 3 systems with available ships. But Thrawn proposed something different. Abandon 2 systems entirely, he told the assembled senior staff in the wardroom. Concentrate all defensive resources on a single point. Kira shook her head immediately. That's insane. We'd be handing them 2 strategic systems without resistance. We'd be demonstrating strategic confidence they won't expect. The Dominion wants to test our defensive capabilities, how we respond to simultaneous pressure. They expect caution, distributed forces, attempts to hold everything. Thrawn highlighted the middle system, Kandra Prime. We make them believe we're protecting this system because it's strategically vital. They commit their forces to what appears to be the main defensive position. Then we hit them from an unexpected angle, Dax finished, understanding dawning. You're turning their test into our ambush. Precisely. The 2 abandoned systems aren't abandoned, they're bait. We position cloaked ships, Klingon birds of prey, with Captain Martok's cooperation, in those systems. When the Dominion forces move to occupy them, believing they've won easy victories, the cloaked ships strike at their supply lines. Simultaneously, our defensive forces at Kandra Prime don't just hold, they counterattack aggressively. Worf studied the tactical projection. It's risky. If the cloaked ships are detected early, we lose the advantage entirely. The Dominion will be monitoring for cloaked ships. But they'll be monitoring at the defensive position, not at the abandoned systems. They won't expect us to position valuable assets in territory we're apparently conceding. Thrawn pulled up additional calculations. The Breen support vessels are the key. They have enhanced sensor capabilities that can detect cloaked ships at close range. We need to eliminate them first, which means we need to know exactly where they'll be positioned, O'Brien interjected, following the logic. Which means we need intelligence on Breen fleet doctrine that's more detailed than anything we currently have. Section 31 is providing that intelligence now. Thrawn displayed the classified data Sloan had delivered, Breen formation preferences, sensor array specifications, tactical communication protocols. The Breen position their sensor vessels at specific distances from primary combat ships. Predictable formation geometry based on optimal sensor range and defensive fire coverage. If we know their doctrine, we know exactly where they'll be. Sisko leaned back, processing the plan's audacity. You're not just defending against their probe. You're turning their intelligence-gathering operation into our intelligence-gathering operation. I'm demonstrating that solid strategists can predict founder moves as effectively as founders predict solid moves. It's psychological warfare wrapped in tactical engagement. Thrawn's expression remained calm, but his voice carried intensity. The Dominion believes they're superior because they're more unified, more controlled, more focused. We prove that diversity of thought, Starfleet tactics, Klingon aggression, Section 31 intelligence, even Romulan sensor data, produces better outcomes than their enforced unity. And if we fail? Kira asked quietly. Then the Dominion confirms their superiority hypothesis, and this war becomes significantly harder to win. But we won't fail. Thrawn met her eyes directly. I don't make predictions unless I'm certain. And I'm certain the founders have underestimated what solids can achieve when we cooperate voluntarily rather than through coercion. The plan was approved, though not without significant debate. Admiral Ross required 3 separate briefings before authorizing the resource commitment. Captain Martok, commanding the Klingon forces assigned to the sector, initially rejected the plan as too clever, preferring direct confrontation. But after Thrawn explained how the strategy would allow Klingon ships to strike from ambush, claiming honor through tactical superiority, Martok grudgingly agreed. 29 hours before the projected Dominion attack, everything was in position. Cloaked Klingon birds of prey waited in the abandoned systems, powered down to minimal signatures, their crews restless but disciplined. Federation heavy cruisers formed defensive perimeter around Kandra Prime, appearing to prepare for desperate last stand. And on Deep Space Nine, Thrawn monitored sensor feeds from multiple sources, watching for the pattern that would confirm his predictions. Garak found him in ops during the Gamma shift, the station quiet except for essential personnel. Can't sleep, the Cardassian asked. Sleep is inefficient when data requires analysis. Thrawn didn't look away from the displays. The Dominion fleet should enter sensor range in 3 hours. If my calculations are correct. And if they're not, then I've miscalculated, which would be instructive. Failure provides information success cannot. Thrawn finally turned. You're nervous, Mr. Garak. Unusual for you. I'm Cardassian. We appreciate well-executed plans, but we're also pragmatists who understand when we're betting everything on uncertain outcomes. Garak moved to stand beside Thrawn, studying the same sensor displays. You've made yourself essential to Federation strategy in less than 2 weeks. If this plan fails, you'll be blamed. If it succeeds, you'll be even more valuable, and therefore more constrained. Either outcome complicates your situation. True. But inaction also complicates situations. At least action generates data. Thrawn's red eyes reflected the display's glow. Besides, I'm not concerned about blame or credit. I'm concerned about patterns. The Dominion's strategic doctrine, the Federation's adaptive capacity, the political dynamics between major powers. This engagement provides data on all three. You're experimenting. Using this battle as a laboratory to test hypotheses about how this galaxy's warfare functions. Garak's tone carried something between admiration and horror. That's remarkably cold-blooded, even by Cardassian standards. It's necessary. I can't help the Federation win this war through intuition alone. I need empirical data on how Dominion forces respond to unconventional strategies. This engagement provides that data, and happens to save Federation territory in the process. Thrawn returned his attention to the sensors. Everyone uses everyone, Mr. Garak. The question is whether the use is mutual and acknowledged, or exploitative and concealed. I prefer the former. 2 hours and 47 minutes later, long-range sensors detected the Dominion fleet emerging from the wormhole. 3 attack wings, exactly as predicted. 2 Breen support vessels in expected formation positions. 1 Vorta command ship maintaining careful distance from primary combat vessels. Thrawn watched the fleet's approach vectors with absolute focus, mentally calculating trajectories against his predictions. The Dominion forces split into 3 groups, exactly as his analysis suggested they would. 2 groups moved toward the abandoned systems. The largest group approached Kandra Prime. They're following your script perfectly, Dax observed from the science station. They're following their doctrine. I merely predicted what doctrine would dictate. Thrawn opened a secure channel to the Klingon ships and Federation defensive positions. All units, hold position. Wait for my mark. On the command ship, Wayound 7 studied his own displays with growing satisfaction. The Federation had concentrated forces at Kandra Prime, predictable, defensive, exactly what solid strategists would do when facing superior force. The other 2 systems were barely defended. Easy conquests. Wayound, his Jem'Hadar first said, the defensive formation at Kandra Prime is unusually concentrated. It may be a trap. The solids are terrified, Wayound replied pleasantly. They've abandoned 2 systems to protect 1. Entirely predictable. This Grand Admiral Thrawn the Founders are concerned about. He's demonstrated nothing exceptional. Proceed with the assault. But as the Dominion forces moved into position, as the Breen support vessels activated enhanced sensors to scan for cloaked ships at Kandra Prime, as Jem'Hadar attack wings prepared to overwhelm Federation defenses. The cloaked Klingon ships activated. Not at Kandra Prime, where sensors were watching. But at the 2 abandoned systems, appearing directly behind Dominion supply vessels that had been left vulnerable by aggressive forward positioning. Simultaneously, the Federation defensive forces at Kandra Prime didn't wait for the Dominion attack. They counterattacked immediately, focusing fire on the Breen sensor vessels with surgical precision. And throughout it all, Thrawn's voice remained calm on the tactical channels, coordinating movements with the precision of a conductor leading an orchestra. Klingon aggression channeled into strategic ambush. Federation firepower directed at calculated vulnerable points. Even Section 31's intelligence on Breen shield frequencies paid off, the sensor vessels went down faster than Dominion doctrine predicted. Wayound 7 watched his carefully planned probe disintegrate into chaos. The solid strategist hadn't just predicted the attack, he'd anticipated the prediction and turned it against them. Withdraw, Wayound ordered, his pleasant tone finally cracking. All units, withdraw to rally point Gamma. This engagement is terminated. On Deep Space Nine, as the Dominion fleet retreated in disarray, the ops crew erupted in cheers. Thrawn simply nodded once, marking the confirmation of his analysis, then began composing after-action reports. Sisko approached, offering his hand. Congratulations, Grand Admiral. You just handed the Dominion their first significant tactical defeat this year. We handed them a lesson, Thrawn corrected, accepting the handshake. Whether they learn from it remains to be seen. But in the Gamma Quadrant, the Founders were already learning. And their assessment of Grand Admiral Thrawn had just shifted from interesting variable to significant threat. The real game was beginning, the Founder homeworld's great link rippled with shared consciousness as tactical data from the Kandra corridor engagement flowed through merged minds. Individual Founders contributed their analyses, their concerns, their calculations. When the link finally separated into individual forms, consensus had been reached. The solid designated Thrawn represents a categorical deviation from expected behavioral patterns, one Founder stated to the assembled Vorta administrators. His strategic doctrine doesn't match Federation, Klingon, Romulan, or any known Alpha Quadrant methodology. He's integrating principles from an unknown framework. Wayoun 7, freshly returned from his defeat, stood with perfect posture despite the humiliation. Vorta didn't experience shame the way Solids did, but they understood failure's implications. Founder, the engagement revealed several critical insights. Thrawn doesn't just predict our movements, he predicts our predictions. Second-order strategic thinking. Third order, another Founder corrected. He anticipated that we would anticipate Federation defensive doctrine. He used our intelligence gathering against us. The Founder shifted form briefly, contemplation expressed through molecular rearrangement. This requires adjustment to our strategic planning. Wayoun, you will compile comprehensive analysis of Thrawn's methods. Every decision, every tactical choice, every pattern. We will learn to think as he thinks. Yes, Founder. But there's another consideration. Wayoun hesitated, unusual for a Vorta. Thrawn isn't simply defending. He's teaching. The Federation's tactical doctrine has already begun adapting to incorporate his methods. Commander Sisko's recent engagement reports show changed decision-making patterns, increased willingness to take calculated risks, better intelligence integration. Thrawn is multiplying himself through the Federation command structure. The Founders exchanged glances, communication passing between them too subtle for solid interpretation. Then we eliminate him, the first Founder decided. Not through military engagement, which confirms his importance. Through infiltration. We have operatives capable of reaching Deep Space Nine undetected. Founder, Wayoun said carefully, killing Thrawn may create martyrdom that strengthens Federation resolve. And it would eliminate the opportunity to study his methods further. What do you propose? Recruitment. If the Romulans and Section 31 have both attempted to recruit him, he's demonstrated willingness to consider offers. Perhaps the Dominion can make him an offer he finds compelling. Wayoun's pleasant smile returned. After all, we can offer something no one else can, a return home. On Deep Space Nine, Thrawn's victory at Kandra Prime had generated consequences he'd anticipated but hoped to delay. Starfleet Command wanted him at Earth immediately for comprehensive strategic consultation. Admiral Ross had personally ordered his transport on the next available ship. I'm not interested in traveling to Earth, Thrawn told Sisko in the commander's office. I understand your preference for autonomy, but this isn't a request. Starfleet Command needs your insights for theater-wide strategic planning. The Dominion War affects hundreds of systems. Your analytical methods could save millions of lives. Sisko's tone was sympathetic but firm. You've proven your value. Now they want to utilize that value properly. By integrating me into their command structure, constraining my methods with regulations and oversight, and reducing my effectiveness through bureaucratic process. Thrawn stood, pacing to the viewport. Commander, I've been through this before. I served an empire that tried to fit my strategic approach into conventional military doctrine. It didn't work. I'm effective precisely because I operate outside standard frameworks. Then help me find a compromise. Because Admiral Ross is preparing to make your cooperation mandatory. Starfleet can invoke emergency wartime regulations if necessary. Thrawn was silent for a long moment, red eyes studying the station's exterior. I'll travel to Earth on one condition. I'm designated as independent strategic consultant, not integrated into chain of command. I provide analysis and recommendations. Starfleet Command maintains full authority to accept or reject my suggestions. No rank, no formal position, no command authority. They won't like that. The Admiralty values clear hierarchies. Then the Admiralty will need to adapt. I've demonstrated my capabilities. Either they trust those capabilities enough to work with me on my terms, or they don't trust them enough to utilize me effectively. There's no middle ground. Thrawn turned back. And Commander, be aware, once I'm on Earth, Section 31 will intensify recruitment efforts. They've been testing the waters. At Starfleet Command, they'll have much easier access. Can you resist them? I can resist anything except bad coffee and ineffective strategic planning. Thrawn's expression might have been amusement. Section 31 operates through leverage. As long as I maintain transparency with you and Admiral Ross, they have minimal leverage. The moment I start keeping secrets, they gain advantage. Before Cisco could respond, Odo's voice came through the comm system. Commander, we have a situation on the promenade. Civilian freighter just docked, and one of the passengers is requesting immediate meeting with Grand Admiral Thrawn. She's claiming to be a Dominion diplomatic envoy. Cisco and Thrawn exchanged glances. A diplomatic envoy? The Dominion doesn't do diplomacy, they do ultimatums. Which makes this worth investigating. Thrawn moved toward the door. Constable, have security escort the envoy to a secure conference room. And scan her thoroughly. If she's a changeling, I want to know before we meet. The envoy was Vorta, specifically, a female administrator named Kilana who bore the characteristic violet eyes and pleasant demeanor of her cloned line. Security scans confirmed she was not a changeling, carried no weapons, and possessed only a single data device. Thrawn met her in the same conference room where he'd spoken with Vreenak, though this time with considerably more security presence. Kilana smiled pleasantly as he entered. Grand Admiral Thrawn. The Founders extend greetings and admiration for your recent tactical accomplishments. You've proven yourself a worthy opponent. Opponent implies we're playing the same game. I'm defending the Federation. The Founders are attempting conquest. Different objectives entirely. Thrawn settled into his seat, studying Kilana with clinical interest. You're Kilana 3. Your genetic line specializes in diplomatic negotiations with strategically valuable individuals. Which means the Founders consider this meeting important enough to send a specialist. Kilana's smile widened, genuine pleasure at being recognized. Excellent. I hoped you'd appreciate the gesture. Yes, the Founders value this conversation highly. They've studied your methods carefully and concluded that you're wasting your considerable talents defending a political structure that doesn't appreciate strategic necessity. The Federation appreciates strategic necessity. They simply balance it against ethical considerations. Which constrains effective action. You know this, Grand Admiral. You've served empires before. You understand that decisive leadership requires freedom from democratic oversight. Kilana activated her data device, displaying images of spatial anomalies. These are genuine, unlike the fabricated data the Romulans offered. Dimensional rifts detected by Dominion deep space sensors in the Gamma Quadrant. We believe they're similar to the phenomenon that brought you here. Thrawn studied the data carefully. Unlike Vreenak's offering, this appeared legitimate. Detailed sensor readings, consistent measurements, scientific analysis that matched what little he understood of the rupture that had displaced him. You're offering to help me investigate these anomalies. We're offering resources you currently lack. The Dominion controls Gamma Quadrant territory where these rifts occur. We have scientific facilities capable of comprehensive analysis. We can provide you with everything needed to potentially find a way home. Kilana leaned forward slightly. In exchange, we ask only that you share strategic insights. Not even exclusively, you could continue advising the Federation if you wish. We simply want access to your analytical framework. You want me to teach the Dominion how I think. We want to learn from a master strategist operating outside our existing paradigms. The founders recognize genius when they encounter it. They're willing to invest significantly in cultivating that genius. Thrawn was silent, processing. The offer was sophisticated, far more sophisticated than Romulan manipulation or Section 31's leverage attempts. The Dominion was offering genuine value in exchange for information, not control. It was almost tempting. Almost. Your offer has 3 flaws, Thrawn said finally. First, you're assuming I'm desperate to return home. I've told others this, and I'll tell you, I'm interested in returning, but not at any cost. Second, you're assuming the spatial anomalies you've detected are actually navigable dimensional rifts rather than random subspace instabilities. The distinction matters scientifically. Third, his red eyes hardened, you're assuming I haven't analyzed Vorta diplomatic psychology thoroughly enough to recognize when I'm being manipulated. K'Ehleyna's pleasant expression never wavered. I assure you, Grand Admiral, this is a genuine offer. The founders respect your capabilities. They want cooperation, not conflict. The founders want to understand how I defeated their probe at Calandra Prime so they can counter my methods. You're not offering cooperation, you're offering intelligence gathering wrapped in diplomatic courtesy. Thrawn stood. Here's my counter-offer. The Dominion withdraws all forces from Federation territory, recognizes the Alpha Quadrant as sovereign space beyond Dominion control, and agrees to peaceful coexistence without demands for subjugation. In exchange, I'll provide comprehensive strategic consultation on defensive doctrine that would make Dominion territory genuinely secure against external threats. You know we can't accept those terms. Because the Dominion's strategic doctrine isn't defensive, it's expansionist. The founders believe they must control others to ensure their own safety. It's paranoia expressing itself as imperialism. Thrawn moved toward the door. Tell the founders I appreciate the creativity of this approach. It was more sophisticated than Section 31's leverage attempts or the Romulans' deception. But the answer is still no. Grand Admiral, K'Ehleyna said, her pleasant tone finally acquiring an edge, the founders can be remarkably generous to those who cooperate. They can also be remarkably thorough in eliminating threats. You've made yourself significant to this war's outcome. That makes you a target. I've been a target since I arrived in this galaxy. The novelty has worn off. Thrawn paused at the door. One more thing, K'Ehleyna. When you report this conversation to Wayound 7, mention that I identified you as K'Ehleyna 3, not the original K'Ehleyna or any other clone generation. That specificity will concern the founders. It means I'm tracking individual Vorta across clone lines, which suggests I'm building comprehensive intelligence on Dominion command personnel. Let them process that implication. After K'Ehleyna departed under heavy security escort, Sisko entered the conference room looking troubled. You just turned down potentially the best intelligence on dimensional anomalies you'll ever receive. I turned down manipulation disguised as intelligence. The Dominion's offer was designed to compromise me, make me dependent on their resources, create obligation that would constrain future actions against them. Classic intelligence operation tradecraft. Thrawn pulled up the data K'Ehleyna had shown him, analyzing it with fresh perspective. But she did provide valuable intelligence inadvertently. How? By showing me data on spatial anomalies the Dominion has detected. Even if the offer was manipulative, the underlying data appears genuine. Which means the Gamma Quadrant does experience dimensional instabilities similar to what brought me here. Thrawn highlighted specific readings. Dr. Dax should analyze these measurements. If the rifts follow patterns, we might be able to predict when and where they'll occur, useful for both scientific research and strategic planning. You're thinking about going home. I'm thinking about gathering data on all available options. That's different from commitment to any particular course. Thrawn closed the display. Besides, even if I wanted to investigate those rifts, doing so would require traveling deep into Dominion-controlled space. Not practical during wartime. Unless the war ends. Unless the war ends, Thrawn agreed. Which brings us back to the immediate problem, how to end this conflict decisively without compromising Federation principles or allowing Dominion expansion. Before they could continue, Dax's voice came through the comm. Benjamin, we're receiving strange reports from multiple sources. Dominion fleets are withdrawing from contested systems across the front lines. It's not a full retreat, but they're pulling back to defensive positions. Sisko and Thrawn rushed to Ops, where tactical displays showed the unprecedented movement. Dozens of Dominion vessels, previously positioned offensively, were redeploying to consolidated defensive perimeters. They're regrouping, Kira said, studying the patterns. After Kandra Prime, they're reassessing their strategic approach. They're adapting, Thrawn corrected, his expression grim. This is exactly what I feared. The Founders are brilliant strategists, they learn from defeats. They've realized that conventional offensive operations are vulnerable to my analytical methods. So they're switching to defensive doctrine while they study my patterns. Isn't that good for us? O'Brien asked. If they're on defense, they're not conquering new territory. It's tactically advantageous short-term. Strategically problematic long-term. Defensive positions are harder to analyze, fewer variables, more predictable formations. And while they're defending, they're studying us. Learning our methods, identifying patterns, developing counters. Thrawn pulled up long-range sensor data. This is the Dominion's greatest strength, institutional learning across their entire command structure. The Founders share information through the Great Link. Every tactical engagement, every strategic choice I make, feeds into their collective analysis. So your successes are teaching them how to defeat you, Dax said quietly. Potentially. Unless I stay ahead of their learning curve by continuously evolving my methods. Thrawn studied the displays with absolute focus. The Founders think in patterns, it's core to their nature. They'll analyze my decisions, identify my preferences, construct models of my strategic thinking. Then they'll exploit those models. How do you counter that? Sisko asked. By making decisions that deliberately don't fit patterns. By introducing randomness, unpredictability, choices that seem irrational until they're analyzed in retrospect. Thrawn turned from the displays. Which means my trip to Earth just became more important. I need to brief Starfleet Command on adaptive counter-strategy, methods for staying ahead of enemy institutional learning. If the Dominion is shifting to defensive doctrine, we need to shift our offensive doctrine to compensate. You're talking about changing how Starfleet fights wars at a fundamental level, Worf said, his skepticism evident. I'm talking about survival. The Dominion has been waging warfare for centuries. They're extremely good at it. The only advantage we have is that they've never encountered a strategist who uses cultural analysis as primary tactical tool. Once they understand my methods and develop counters, that advantage evaporates. Thrawn's red eyes swept the room. We have a window, maybe weeks, maybe months, where my analytical framework remains effective. We need to use that window to inflict maximum strategic damage, force the Dominion into negotiating position, and end this war before they adapt completely. You're saying we need to win fast or not at all, Kira said. I'm saying the longer this war continues, the more the Dominion learns how to fight us effectively. Time favors them unless we use it more efficiently. Thrawn moved toward the turbolift. Commander Sisko, prepare your report to Admiral Ross. Emphasize that my strategic consultation has time limitations. The Founders are adapting. We need to move decisively while we still hold analytical advantage. After Thrawn departed for his quarters, the senior staff remained in Ops, processing the implications. He's right, Dax said finally. We've been treating this war as a marathon. But if the Dominion's learning curve is as steep as he suggests, it's actually a sprint. And we're already falling behind. Sisko stared at the tactical displays showing Dominion forces repositioning across multiple sectors. Thrawn had given them victories. But victories meant the enemy was learning. And an enemy that learned faster than you evolved was an enemy that eventually won. Get me Admiral Ross, Sisko ordered. And tell him we need to discuss accelerated offensive operations. If we're going to win this war, we need to do it before the Dominion figures out how to beat us. In his quarters, Thrawn composed detailed analysis of the Dominion's defensive repositioning, cross-referencing fleet movements against Founder psychology and Vorta command patterns. But part of his mind was elsewhere, processing Kalana's offer, considering the spatial anomalies data, calculating probabilities. He'd come to this universe accidentally. He'd helped the Federation because it aligned with his principles and gave him purpose. But eventually, if he survived long enough, he'd need to make a choice. Stay permanently in this galaxy, or find a way home to the conflicts and responsibilities he'd left behind. The Empire was fractured, the New Republic was struggling, and Grand Admiral Thrawn had abandoned his post to pursue what had seemed like a critical strategic opportunity. If he returned, would there be anything left to return to? Would his forces still be loyal? Would the warlords have consolidated power in his absence? Questions without answers. Variables without data. So he did what he always did when faced with uncertainty. He focused on immediate tactical problems and gathered information for future strategic decisions. The Dominion War would be won or lost within months. After that, he'd reassess his options. Until then, he had work to do. And in the Gamma Quadrant, the Founders reached their own conclusions. Grand Admiral Thrawn could not be recruited, could not be controlled, could not be predicted using conventional analysis. Which left only one option, elimination, followed by comprehensive study of his methods through captured records and interrogated personnel who'd worked with him. The order went out to Dominion intelligence operatives throughout the Alpha Quadrant: locate Thrawn's vulnerabilities, identify opportunities for assassination, prepare for elimination of the primary strategic threat to Dominion victory. The game had escalated. And both sides knew only one could survive. The transport to Earth was a Nebula-class starship, the USS Sutherland, commanded by Captain Shelby. She was professional, efficient, and deeply uncomfortable with her passenger. Thrawn spent most of the 3-day journey in the observation lounge, reviewing classified intelligence briefings Admiral Ross had forwarded and studying comparative analyses of Federation versus Dominion strategic doctrines. Captain Shelby found him there on the second day, staring at tactical projections with unnerving intensity. "Grand Admiral," she said formally. "I've been instructed to ensure your comfort during transport. Is there anything you require?" "Information." Thrawn didn't look away from the displays. "Captain, you commanded the USS Sutherland during the Battle of Wolf 359. You witnessed Borg tactical adaptation firsthand. I'd like to hear your assessment of their learning capabilities." Shelby's expression tightened. Wolf 359 remained a painful memory. "The Borg adapt to our weapons almost instantly. Every time we modify phaser frequencies or adjust shield harmonics, they counter within seconds. It's like fighting an opponent who learns faster than you can innovate." "Exactly." Thrawn finally turned to face her. "The Dominion isn't as technologically adaptive as the Borg, but their strategic learning follows similar principles. They observe, analyze, adapt, implement. The only difference is timescale. The Borg adapt in seconds, the Dominion in weeks or months. But the fundamental challenge is identical." "How did you defeat the Borg?" Shelby asked. "Your galaxy must have faced similar threats. We didn't have the Borg. But we had species that adapted rapidly, the Yuuzhan Vong, extragalactic invaders with biological technology that evolved in response to threats. The key to fighting adaptive enemies is staying ahead of their learning curve. You must innovate faster than they can analyze, introduce variables they can't predict, force them into situations their adaptation can't handle. Easier said than done when you're outgunned and outnumbered. Which is why you emphasize quality over quantity. One perfectly executed unpredictable strategy is worth a dozen conventional victories." Thrawn gestured to the tactical displays. "The Federation's greatest strength is diversity, hundreds of member worlds, thousands of cultures, millions of individual perspectives. That diversity generates strategic unpredictability that homogeneous empires can't match. But you're not utilizing it effectively. We're a unified military. Chain of command requires standardization. Chain of command requires coordination, not standardization. There's a difference. Thrawn pulled up battle reports from recent engagements. Look at these Federation victories, nearly all follow similar patterns. Defensive positioning, calculated retreats, coordinated counterattacks. Effective, yes. But predictable. The Dominion has already developed counters for standard Federation tactical doctrine. Then what do you propose? Chaos. Controlled chaos. Thrawn's red eyes gleamed. Give individual ship commanders more autonomy. Encourage unorthodox tactics. Mix Federation, Klingon, and even Romulan ship configurations in single battle groups. Make every engagement fundamentally different from the last. The Dominion can't adapt to patterns if there are no patterns to identify. Shelby considered this carefully. Starfleet Command would never authorize such operational flexibility. The Admiralty values consistency and predictability. Then Starfleet Command needs to evolve or accept continued stalemate. Thrawn's tone wasn't harsh, just factual. Captain, I've studied your service record. You're innovative, willing to challenge conventional thinking. At Wolf 359, you recommended unconventional tactics that might have saved lives if they'd been implemented. But Captain Picard's reluctance to deviate from Starfleet doctrine cost precious time. That's unfair to Captain Picard. He was being cautious in an unprecedented situation. Caution is appropriate when you understand the threat. Against unknown or rapidly adapting enemies, caution becomes paralysis. Thrawn closed the displays. I'm not criticizing Captain Picard's character, I'm criticizing the institutional culture that prioritizes protocol over adaptation. The Dominion doesn't have that weakness. The Founders can reorganize their entire strategic doctrine in hours through the Great Link. Federation decision-making takes weeks of committee meetings and Admiralty debates. So you're saying we need to be more like the Dominion? I'm saying you need to leverage your advantages while minimizing your disadvantages. The Federation will never match Dominion efficiency in centralized command. But you can exceed them in adaptive innovation if you give your people freedom to think independently. After Shelby departed, troubled but intrigued, Thrawn returned to his analysis. But he was interrupted again, this time by an unexpected visitor materializing in the observation lounge through the ship's transporter. Luther Sloan stood there, hands clasped behind his back, looking entirely too comfortable for someone who just beamed aboard a moving starship without authorization. You're persistent, Thrawn observed without surprise. You're difficult to pin down. Thought I'd take advantage of your captive audience during transport. Sloan settled into a chair uninvited. I've been reviewing your after-action reports from Kandra Prime. Quite impressive. The Dominion's still trying to figure out how you predicted their movements so precisely. Pattern recognition isn't magic. It's disciplined observation and cultural analysis. Which makes you the most valuable strategic asset in the Alpha Quadrant. And that worries me. Sloan leaned forward. You know what happens to irreplaceable assets during wartime? They become targets. The Dominion has put a price on your head. We've intercepted communications indicating multiple assassination attempts in planning stages. I assumed as much after Kalana's visit. Recruitment failed, so elimination becomes logical next step. Doesn't that concern you? Concern is unproductive. Preparation is productive. Thrawn pulled up security protocols he'd been developing. I've already analyzed potential assassination methodologies, changeling infiltration, targeted orbital bombardment, poisoning, transporter sabotage, approximately 17 other approaches ranked by probability and technical feasibility. I've developed countermeasures for each. Sloan actually smiled, genuine appreciation. You're paranoid. I like that. But paranoia only goes so far when the enemy is literally shape-shifting infiltrators who can become anyone, anywhere. Which is why I've requested that Constable Odo provide security consultation for my Earth visit. Changeling psychology, infiltration detection methods, behavioral analysis specific to founder operatives. Who better to identify shapeshifters than another shapeshifter? Odo isn't coming to Earth. Starfleet security deemed it unnecessary. Then Starfleet security is making a mistake that could prove fatal. Thrawn's expression hardened. Mr. Sloan, I appreciate Section 31's concern for my survival, though I suspect it's motivated more by preserving a strategic asset than genuine care for my well-being. But I don't need protection. I need information. If you genuinely want to help, provide intelligence on confirmed or suspected changeling infiltrators in Starfleet Command's sphere of operation. That information is beyond classification levels available to civilian consultants. Then I'll operate without it and accept increased risk. But understand, if a changeling successfully assassinates me because Section 31 withheld critical intelligence, that's a strategic failure you'll bear responsibility for. Thrawn stood, moving to the viewport showing streaking stars. You want me to trust Section 31 enough to cooperate fully. Trust requires information sharing. Either provide the intelligence I need to survive, or accept that my survival probability decreases significantly. Sloan was silent for a long moment, calculating. If I provide this intelligence, and I'm not saying I will, what do you offer in return? Continued strategic consultation. Direct access to my tactical analyses before they're filtered through Starfleet Command bureaucracy. And, Thrawn turned back, complete honesty about my long-term intentions regarding this universe. Which are unknown. I don't make strategic commitments without comprehensive data. But if Section 31 helps me survive long enough to gather that data, I'll share my conclusions with you before acting on them. Fair exchange of information for information. Sloan stood slowly, his expression unreadable. I'll consider it. But Grand Admiral, understand something. Section 31 exists because the Federation faces threats that idealism alone can't counter. We're pragmatists in an idealistic society. You operate similarly, strategic calculation wrapped in principled veneer. We're not so different. We're extremely different. I subordinate strategy to principles. Section 31 subordinates principles to strategy. That distinction determines whether you're protecting civilization or destroying it incrementally. Thrawn's red eyes held Sloan's gaze. Emperor Palpatine started as a pragmatist too. Necessary evils became acceptable evils became standard operating procedure. By the end, the empire he built was indistinguishable from the threats he claimed to oppose. Don't make the same mistake. After Sloan departed, through the transporter again, bypassing ship security with concerning ease, Thrawn spent the rest of the journey preparing for Earth. Starfleet Command would want detailed briefings, strategic assessments, tactical recommendations. More importantly, they'd want to understand how he thought, the analytical framework underlying his predictions. Teaching them would be dangerous. The more people who understood his methods, the more predictable those methods became. But not teaching them meant the Federation remained dependent on his personal involvement, unsustainable long-term. The paradox of expertise, share it and diminish its value, hoard it and limit its impact. He'd need to find a middle path, teach principles without revealing complete methodology, demonstrate patterns without exposing all analytical tools, make them better strategists without making himself obsolete. A fascinating challenge. And one that would determine whether his presence in this universe produced lasting benefit or temporary advantage that faded when he left. The Sutherland dropped out of warp at Earth orbit, and Thrawn got his first view of the Federation's heart, a blue-green jewel surrounded by orbital facilities, defensive platforms, hundreds of ships. It was beautiful in the way inhabited worlds always were. Teeming with life, purpose, civilization. He thought of Coruscant, the Empire's capital, an entire planet covered in city, artificial to its core. Earth retained natural beauty alongside technological development. The Federation's idealism expressed through urban planning. Captain Shelby escorted him to the transporter room personally. Grand Admiral, Starfleet Command has assigned a security detail for your visit. They'll meet you at headquarters. Security against external threats or security to monitor my movements? Shelby smiled slightly. Both, probably. Welcome to Earth, Grand Admiral. Try not to disrupt our entire strategic doctrine while you're here. I'll do my best. But no promises. He materialized in Starfleet Command's secured transporter facility, immediately surrounded by security officers. But one figure stood out, an older admiral with weathered features and sharp eyes. Admiral William Ross. Grand Admiral Thrawn. Welcome to Earth. Ross offered his hand. I've been looking forward to this conversation. As have I, Admiral. Though I suspect we have different expectations for its outcome. Probably. Let's find out. Ross led him through corridors filled with hurrying personnel, tactical displays showing fleet deployments across dozens of sectors, the organized chaos of military headquarters during wartime. They arrived at a secure briefing room where a dozen flag officers waited, the Admiralty Board, Starfleet's highest strategic command. Thrawn surveyed the room quickly, identifying personalities through posture and expression. Admiral Nechayev, calculating, political, pragmatic. Admiral Hansen, aggressive, results-oriented, impatient. Admiral Tlara, Vulcan, logical, skeptical of emotional decision-making. Others whose names he didn't know but whose types he recognized from decades of navigating military bureaucracies. Admirals, Ross said, Grand Admiral Thrawn has agreed to brief us on Dominion's strategic vulnerabilities and recommended operational changes. I expect professional courtesy and open minds. The briefing lasted 4 hours. Thrawn presented his analysis of Dominion command structures, founder psychology, Borda administration patterns, Jem'Hadar tactical doctrine. He explained cultural anthropology's role in strategic prediction, demonstrated pattern recognition methodologies, outlined specific vulnerabilities in current Dominion defensive positioning. The admirals listened with varying degrees of acceptance. Some were fascinated, particularly the younger officers who'd been advocating for tactical innovation. Others were skeptical, viewing Thrawn's methods as unproven speculation rather than rigorous military science. Admiral Nechayev was the first to voice objections. Grand Admiral, your cultural analysis is interesting, but Starfleet strategy is built on centuries of experience and rigorous tactical doctrine. You're asking us to abandon proven methods for untested theories. I'm asking you to supplement proven methods with adaptive frameworks. The Dominion isn't fighting the same war Starfleet has prepared for. They're more centralized, more ideologically driven, more psychologically sophisticated than previous adversaries. Your existing doctrine is effective against conventional threats. But the Dominion isn't conventional. Neither were the Board, Admiral Hansen interjected. And we developed effective countermeasures through systematic technical analysis, not cultural speculation. You developed countermeasures that work temporarily until the Borg adapt. That's reactive strategy, always one step behind. What I'm proposing is predictive strategy, anticipating adaptation before it occurs and preparing counters in advance. Thrawn pulled up comparative projections. At current casualty rates and resource consumption levels, this war will last another 3 to 5 years. Federation industrial capacity can't sustain that timeline. You'll win eventually through attrition, but at catastrophic cost. And your methods would end the war faster? Admiral Tlara asked, her Vulcan skepticism evident. My methods would identify strategic targets that force Dominion negotiation within 12 to 18 months. Minimum casualties, maximum political impact, decisive psychological advantage. Thrawn displayed his analysis, key Dominion facilities, strategic choke points, vulnerable command structures. But implementing this requires operational flexibility your current doctrine doesn't permit. You need to authorize individual fleet commanders to make tactical decisions without waiting for Admiralty approval. You need to encourage creative problem-solving over standardized responses. You need to trust your people to think independently. The room erupted in debate. Some admirals saw merit in Thrawn's proposals. Others viewed them as dangerous decentralization that would fracture command authority. The argument continued for another hour before Ross finally called for order. Enough. We're not deciding strategic overhauls today. Grand Admiral Thrawn will remain at Starfleet Command for comprehensive consultation. We'll evaluate his recommendations systematically before implementation. Ross turned to Thrawn. You'll have access to classified intelligence, strategic planning facilities, and direct communication with field commanders. In exchange, you'll provide detailed analysis of Dominion vulnerabilities and specific tactical recommendations. Acceptable? Acceptable, with one condition. I need Constable Odo brought to Earth for security consultation. The Dominion has active assassination protocols targeting me. Odo's expertise in changeling psychology is critical for my continued survival. Approved. Anything else? Yes. I need to speak with the USS Enterprise's command staff, Captain Picard specifically. His experience with the board provides relevant parallels to Dominion adaptive capabilities. And, Thrawn hesitated slightly, I understand he's also experienced assimilation and recovery. That psychological perspective could be valuable. Ross nodded slowly. I'll arrange a meeting. The Enterprise is currently on patrol near the Romulan neutral zone, but we can recall them for strategic consultation. After the briefing concluded and the admirals dispersed, still arguing among themselves, Ross walked Thrawn to his assigned quarters. You know you've just turned Starfleet Command into a battlefield, Ross said quietly. Half those admirals want to implement your recommendations immediately. The other half want you removed as a destabilizing influence. Politics is inevitable in military hierarchies. I'm more concerned about the Dominion's response. Thrawn entered his quarters, comfortable but clearly monitored. They know I'm on Earth now. They know Starfleet is consulting with me on strategic planning. That makes this facility a high-value target. Earth's defensive grid is the most sophisticated in the Federation. We can handle threats. Can you handle a single Changeling infiltrator with access to command codes and facility layouts? Because that's the most probable attack vector. Thrawn moved to the window overlooking San Francisco. Admiral, I appreciate Starfleet's hospitality. But understand, by bringing me here, you've made Earth's security dependent on catching infiltrators who are literally designed to be undetectable. I hope your confidence is justified. After Ross departed, Thrawn activated the room's computer terminal and began accessing classified intelligence databases. His security clearance was extensive. Admiral Ross had clearly authorized broad access. Good. He needed comprehensive data on founder infiltration patterns, changeling detection methodologies, historical precedents for dimensional phenomena similar to his arrival. And buried in restricted files, he found something interesting, Section 31's assessment of his strategic value. The report was clinical, detailed, calculating. They'd analyzed his decisions, predicted his future choices, identified potential leverage points for recruitment. They'd also concluded he was unlikely to cooperate through conventional means. Which meant they'd eventually try unconventional approaches, more sophisticated manipulation, perhaps threats against people he'd begun caring about. Sisko, Dax, Garak, even Odo. The report revealed Section 31's greatest weakness: they thought like intelligence officers, not strategists. They saw people as assets to be leveraged rather than agents with independent agendas. It made them predictable. Thrawn composed a message to Commander Sisko, detailing his observations and requesting specific intelligence on Dominion activities near Deep Space Nine. Constable Odo arrived on Earth 48 hours after Thrawn's request, accompanied by Major Kira and looking distinctly uncomfortable with the attention his presence generated. Changelings on Earth were rare enough to draw stares, a changeling working for Starfleet was practically unprecedented since the war began. Thrawn met them in a secure briefing room deep within Starfleet Command, away from observation and monitoring. "Constable, Major. Thank you for coming." Thrawn gestured to chairs, though Odo typically preferred standing. "I need your expertise on Founder infiltration methodologies." "You think there's already a changeling here," Odo said, statement, not question. "I think Earth is the Federation's strategic command center during wartime. I think the Dominion has had years to position deep cover operatives. And I think my presence here makes Starfleet Command an even higher value target than it already was." Thrawn pulled up facility schematics. "The security protocols are impressive: blood screenings, biometric verification, random sensor sweeps. But they're designed for detecting changelings who make mistakes. A perfect infiltrator wouldn't trigger any of those measures." "There's no such thing as a perfect infiltrator," Kira objected. "Everyone makes mistakes eventually. Solids make mistakes. Changelings trained by the Founders for decades, with perfect memory of their assumed forms and complete commitment to their mission." Odo's liquid features shifted, concern. "They might not make mistakes for years. Maybe never. Which is why we need to think like Founders rather than security officers." Thrawn displayed tactical analysis. "If I were organizing changeling infiltration of Starfleet Command, I wouldn't replace high-ranking admirals, too much scrutiny, too many people who know them intimately. I'd replace mid-level personnel with broad access but minimal personal relationships. Staff officers, technical specialists, administrative coordinators. People who move through secure areas without drawing attention." "That's hundreds of potential targets," Kira said. "Narrow it down. Who has access to strategic planning sessions? Who handles classified intelligence distribution? Who maintains computer systems and communication networks?" Thrawn highlighted specific duty positions. "Cross-reference those positions with personnel who've been off-station for extended periods in the past year, opportunities for replacement. Then screen for individuals whose behavior has subtly changed after those absences." Odo studied the analysis, his security officer's instincts engaging fully. "You're not just trying to protect yourself. You're trying to root out infiltrators systematically. I'm trying to ensure that when Starfleet implements strategic recommendations based on my analysis, those recommendations aren't being fed directly to Dominion intelligence." Thrawn's expression hardened. "The Founders are brilliant strategists. If they have operatives in Starfleet Command, they're learning our planning process in real time. Every tactical advantage I provide gets neutralized before it's deployed." Over the next 72 hours, Odo conducted the most comprehensive security review Starfleet Command had experienced since the war began. Blood screenings were mandatory for all personnel with classified access. Behavior pattern analysis identified 17 individuals showing subtle changes consistent with changeling replacement. Background investigations uncovered 3 staff officers with unexplained gaps in their service records. And in the Computer Systems Division, a technical specialist named Lieutenant Commander Devek broke under questioning. He wasn't a changeling, he was a Dominion collaborator, recruited 3 months earlier during a supply mission to a contested system. His mission: sabotage security protocols to allow changeling infiltration. The interrogation revealed something more disturbing. The Dominion hadn't just targeted Starfleet Command. They'd targeted Thrawn specifically. Devek had been instructed to monitor Thrawn's movements, identify vulnerabilities, and create opportunities for assassination. "The Founders are serious about eliminating you," Admiral Ross said after reviewing Devek's confession. "They're investing significant resources into this operation. Because they've concluded I'm more dangerous alive than dead. Which means our strategic planning is more effective than they anticipated." Thrawn studied interrogation transcripts. But Lieutenant Commander Devek was a distraction. He's too obvious, too easily caught. The real infiltrators are still in position. You think there are more collaborators? I think Devek was meant to be discovered. His capture makes us feel secure, convinces us we've solved the problem. Meanwhile, the actual Changeling operatives remain undetected. Thrawn pulled up personnel databases. Constable Odo, you mentioned that Changelings maintaining solid form for extended periods experience discomfort. How frequently would a deep cover operative need to revert to liquid state? Depends on the individual and their training. Once every 16 hours minimum for most Changelings. The Founders might be able to extend that to 24 hours or more. Odo's expression was grim. But finding private time to revert without detection is challenging in a facility this monitored. Which means they'd need secure locations, somewhere they can access regularly without suspicion. Thrawn highlighted sections of the facility schematic. Maintenance corridors, service access points, secured storage areas. Places where someone might spend 10 to 15 minutes alone without generating questions. That's still dozens of potential locations, Kira said. Then we narrow it further. Monitor those locations during off-shift periods when foot traffic is minimal. Use passive sensors that detect organic matter without requiring active scanning. Changelings in liquid form have different density signatures than water or other fluids commonly found in those areas. Thrawn looked to Ross. Admiral, I recommend covert sensor deployment in all secure service areas. No announcements, no official protocol changes. Just quiet monitoring. Ross nodded slowly. I'll authorize it. But Grand Admiral, this is consuming significant resources. We're hunting ghosts that might not exist. The Dominion's withdrawal to defensive positions wasn't coincidental. They're preparing for something, either a major offensive after they've adapted to our tactics, or a decapitation strike against Federation command authority. Possibly both. Thrawn's red eyes were intense. We need to root out infiltrators before that happens. Otherwise, every strategic advantage we've gained becomes meaningless. 3 days later, passive sensors detected an anomaly. A maintenance access corridor in Section 7, deep within Starfleet Command's secured levels, showed organic density signatures inconsistent with human or other solid species presence. The signature appeared for approximately 12 minutes during Gamma shift, when the corridor should have been empty. Odo reviewed the sensor data personally. That's a Changeling. No question. The density variations match perfectly with transition between solid and liquid states. Can you identify who it is? Thrawn asked. Not from this alone. We need to monitor who accesses that corridor during those time frames. But they'll be careful, probably vary their patterns, use different routes, avoid establishing routines. Odo's liquid features showed frustration. This could take weeks. We don't have weeks. The Dominion is planning something imminent, I can feel the pattern shifting. Thrawn studied the facility schematics with absolute focus. We need to force their hand. Make them act before they're ready. How? Admiral Ross asked. By announcing a major strategic conference. All senior admiralty, key field commanders recalled to Earth, comprehensive planning session for coordinated offensive operations against Dominion strongholds. Thrawn pulled up proposed operational plans he'd been developing. We make it appear that Starfleet is preparing a decisive strike, something the Dominion can't ignore. Their infiltrators will need to report this immediately, transmit detailed intelligence, possibly attempt sabotage or assassination to prevent the operation. You're using yourself as bait again, Kira said. You realize this is insane. It's necessary. The Changeling operatives are in position, monitoring, waiting for optimal opportunity. We give them that opportunity under controlled conditions where we're prepared for their response. Thrawn turned to Odo. Constable, you'll need to be present at the strategic conference. If a Changeling attempts infiltration or assassination, you're our best chance of detection. One Changeling against potentially several Founder-trained operatives. Those aren't favorable odds. Which is why we'll have additional countermeasures. Confined space, multiple security layers, biometric sensors on every entrance, and, Thrawn smiled slightly, Commander Worf. I understand he's had extensive experience fighting changelings. Worf is still recovering from injuries sustained in the Battle of Cardassia, Ross said. He's not cleared for active duty. Then clear him. We need someone who thinks like a warrior, who won't hesitate when action is required. And preferably someone the Dominion doesn't expect to be present. Thrawn's expression was calm, but his voice carried absolute certainty. Admiral, the Dominion is planning to strike at Federation command authority. Either we control when and where that strike occurs, or they do. I prefer to maintain initiative. Ross exchanged glances with Kira and Odo. The plan was risky, potentially catastrophic if it failed. But Thrawn had been right about every major prediction so far. I'll authorize the strategic conference. We'll recall senior commanders from across the fleet under the pretense of offensive planning. But Grand Admiral, Ross leaned forward, if this goes wrong, if Changeling operatives successfully infiltrate and compromise our command structure, the consequences will be devastating. If we do nothing and allow them to strike at their chosen moment, the consequences will be identical. At least this way, we're prepared. Thrawn stood, moving to the viewport overlooking San Francisco Bay. The Founders believe solids are predictable. They expect us to follow standard security protocols, to react defensively, to prioritize self-preservation over strategic objectives. We're going to prove them wrong. Over the next week, Starfleet Command became a hub of intense activity. Senior admirals returned from fleet postings. The USS Enterprise arrived in Earth orbit, with Captain Picard and his senior staff summoned for strategic consultation. Klingon liaison officers arrived to coordinate joint operations. Even Romulan observers appeared, supposedly to ensure the Alpha Quadrant alliance remained functional. And through it all, Thrawn moved like a conductor orchestrating a complex performance, meeting with field commanders, reviewing tactical analyses, refining operational plans that were simultaneously genuine strategic proposals and elaborate bait for changeling infiltrators. Captain Picard met with Thrawn privately in one of Starfleet Command's secure briefing rooms. The two men studied each other carefully, veteran commanders from different backgrounds, different philosophies, different galaxies. Grand Admiral Thrawn, Picard said formally. I've read Admiral Ross's reports on your strategic contributions. Quite impressive. Though I confess some concern about your methodological approach. You're concerned that cultural analysis is subjective rather than empirical. That my predictions rely on psychological speculation rather than rigorous data. Thrawn gestured to a chair. Captain Picard, I've studied your service record. You're a diplomat and philosopher as much as a military commander. You understand that warfare isn't purely technical, it's fundamentally about understanding adversaries. I understand that. But I also understand that anthropological analysis can produce bias and misinterpretation. Cultural stereotyping, even sophisticated stereotyping, can lead to dangerous assumptions. Picard settled into his chair. The Federation's strength comes from recognizing individual complexity beyond species generalization. Agreed. But recognizing complexity doesn't mean ignoring patterns. The Founders aren't individuals, they're collective consciousness that shares thought through the Great Link. Understanding their collective psychology isn't stereotyping. It's pattern recognition applied to genuinely homogeneous group psychology. Thrawn pulled up displays showing Dominion tactical decisions over the past 3 years. Every engagement follows similar principles: psychological warfare, overwhelming force, demonstration of Founder superiority. That's not coincidence. That's institutional culture expressing itself through military doctrine. Picard studied the displays thoughtfully. And you believe this cultural framework makes them predictable? I believe it makes them understandable. Predictability is emergent property of understanding. Thrawn closed the displays. But I didn't request this meeting to debate methodology. I wanted your perspective on adaptive enemies. The Borg assimilated you. You experienced their collective consciousness firsthand. What did you learn about fighting opponents who learn faster than you can evolve? Picard was silent for a long moment, processing memories that remained painful despite years of distance. The Borg are nearly impossible to defeat through conventional means. Every tactic we develop, they adapt to within minutes. The only successful approach is to exploit their dependence on collective consciousness, disrupt their interconnectivity, force them to function as individuals rather than unified collective. The Dominion has similar vulnerability. The Founders depend on absolute control over their subordinates. Disrupt that control, introduce doubt, demonstrate that solid species can exceed Changeling strategic capability, prove that enforced order is actually weakness, and their entire structure destabilizes. Thrawn leaned forward. But there's a risk. If we strike at their psychological foundation and fail, we confirm their superiority narrative. Make them stronger rather than weaker. So this strategic conference you're organizing, it's not just military planning. It's psychological warfare. Everything is psychological warfare, Captain. Ships and weapons are just tools for influencing minds. Thrawn's red eyes were intense. The Dominion has sent Changeling infiltrators to this facility. They're monitoring our planning, looking for vulnerabilities, preparing to strike. We're giving them what they're looking for, under controlled conditions where we can respond decisively. You're setting a trap. I'm creating an engagement where we hold tactical advantage. The Founders believe they're superior strategists. We're going to demonstrate that belief is false. And when we do, when we capture or eliminate their operatives, when we prove that solid ingenuity exceeds Changeling calculation, their psychological advantage diminishes significantly. Picard nodded slowly, understanding the layers of strategy at work. It's brilliant and terrifying in equal measure. You're not just winning battles, you're reshaping the war's psychological landscape. Because that's the war that matters. The Dominion can rebuild fleets, replace losses, continue fighting for decades through sheer resource advantage. But if we break their certainty about Changeling superiority, if we introduce genuine doubt into Founder strategic calculations, the war ends faster and with fewer casualties on all sides. Thrawn stood, moving to the viewport. Captain Picard, I need your help with something. When Changelings infiltrate, they study their targets carefully. But they're not perfect mimics. There are tells, subtle behavioral inconsistencies, emotional responses that don't quite match. You've encountered Changeling imposters before. What did you notice? Micro-expressions. A Changeling can hold a perfect physical form indefinitely, but human emotional responses involve complex neural patterns. Fear, joy, surprise, these produce split-second facial changes that are difficult to replicate without genuinely experiencing the emotion. Picard turned from the window. But identifying these tells requires close observation and intimate knowledge of the individual being mimicked. Which is why I need your senior staff involved in the strategic conference. Commander Data particularly, an android would notice computational inconsistencies that biological observers might miss. And Counselor Troy, a Betazoid empath sensing emotional discontinuities, could identify changelings through psychological rather than physical detection. You're assembling a multi-layered detection grid. Physical, behavioral, psychological, computational. Picard allowed himself a slight smile. You don't just play three-dimensional chess, Grand Admiral. You play four-dimensional chess while everyone else is still learning checkers. Flattering, but inaccurate. I simply recognize that complex problems require multifaceted solutions. The Dominion is sophisticated. Our response must be more sophisticated. Thrawn turned back. Will you and your crew assist? If it means ending this war faster and preventing further casualties, the Enterprise stands ready. Picard offered his hand. Though I have one question, Grand Admiral. After all this, after you've helped the Federation defeat the Dominion, after you've revolutionized our strategic doctrine, what happens to you? Do you stay? Do you try to return home? What are your intentions? Thrawn accepted the handshake, holding Picard's gaze steadily. Honest answer, I don't know yet. I'm gathering data, evaluating options, preparing for multiple contingencies. But whatever I ultimately decide, Captain, I'll be transparent about it. I won't disappear without explanation or leave chaos in my wake. The Federation has treated me with remarkable trust despite having every reason for suspicion. That deserves reciprocal honesty. Good. Because trust is our most valuable currency during wartime. Once lost, it's almost impossible to regain. Picard released the handshake. I'll brief my crew on the strategic conference parameters. And Grand Admiral, be careful. The Dominion has made you their primary target. Even brilliant strategists can be killed by lucky shots. I'm aware. But as a wise human once said, I would rather be lucky than good. Though personally, I prefer being both. The strategic conference was scheduled for 72 hours later. In that time, Starfleet Command transformed into a fortress, additional security personnel, enhanced sensor grids, Odo conducting continuous sweeps for Changeling infiltrators, Worf coordinating tactical response protocols. And in the maintenance corridors, passive sensors continued detecting periodic organic signatures consistent with Changeling presence. The infiltrators were still here, still monitoring, still waiting for their moment. Thrawn spent those final hours in meditation, not the force-based meditation of Jedi, which didn't exist in this universe, but the disciplined mental preparation he developed over decades of command. Visualizing scenarios, calculating probabilities, preparing responses for dozens of potential outcomes. The Dominion would strike during the conference. He was certain of this the way he was certain of gravity and thermodynamics, not because he'd predicted it, but because he'd engineered conditions where striking became their only logical option. The question wasn't whether they'd attack. The question was how many operatives they'd deploy, what methods they'd use, and whether the Federation's countermeasures would prove sufficient. One way or another, the answer was coming soon. And Grand Admiral Thrawn would be ready. The strategic conference began at 0900 hours in Starfleet Command's largest secure briefing room, a circular chamber 3 levels underground, surrounded by sensor grids and ablative armor, with only 2 entrances and both under continuous guard. 47 senior officers assembled, admirals from across the fleet, field commanders with distinguished service records, intelligence specialists, and the Enterprise senior staff. Thrawn stood at the central podium, surrounded by holographic tactical displays showing proposed offensive operations against key Dominion strongholds. To any observer, including Changeling infiltrators, this appeared to be legitimate strategic planning for a decisive Federation counteroffensive. Admirals, commanders, Thrawn began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber, the Dominion has withdrawn to defensive positions following our success at Kandra Prime. They're adapting to our tactical evolution, which means our window for decisive action is closing. I've identified 3 strategic targets that, if neutralized simultaneously, would force Dominion withdrawal from significant portions of contested space. He pulled up the first target, a Dominion shipyard facility in the Gamma Quadrant, 3 days past the wormhole. Facility Gamma 7 produces approximately 30% of Dominion warship construction. Destroying it would cripple their ability to replace losses. The second target appeared, a Vorta administrative complex coordinating supply logistics for 6 sectors. Eliminating this coordination hub would create cascading supply failures across multiple fronts. Jem'Hadar forces depend on Ketracel-White distribution. Disrupt distribution, disrupt their entire military capacity. The third target was the most audacious, a founder observation post near the Bajoran wormhole's Gamma Quadrant terminus. This facility monitors all traffic through the wormhole. Eliminating it doesn't just blind Dominion intelligence, it demonstrates that even the founders themselves are vulnerable to direct assault. The room erupted in debate. Some officers embraced the aggressive strategy. Others viewed it as reckless overreach that would stretch Federation resources dangerously thin. The argument continued for 30 minutes, exactly as Thrawn had calculated. Because while everyone focused on the tactical displays, Counselor Deanna Troi moved quietly through the room, her empathic senses cataloging emotional signatures. Commander Data monitored the assembly with android precision, noting microbehavioral inconsistencies. Constable Odo watched from the entrance, his liquid features showing intense concentration. And Worf stood by the secondary entrance, hand near his phaser, predatory alertness in every movement. 12 minutes into the heated debate, Troy caught it, an emotional void where there should have been complex human response. A rear admiral named Herthel, normally cautious and analytical, was arguing passionately for immediate implementation of Thrawn's plan. Passion without the underlying emotional substrate that passion required. She caught Thrawn's eye and gave the prearranged signal, a subtle gesture that looked like adjusting her uniform. Thrawn continued his presentation smoothly. Admiral Herthel raises valid points about timing. But let me address the resource allocation concerns. He pulled up additional data while positioning himself between the suspected changeling and the exit. Data moved next, his android reflexes faster than biological perception. Admiral Herthel, I have a question about the tactical specifications you referenced earlier. Could you clarify the shield harmonics parameters you mentioned? Herthel turned to Data, his expression showing slight confusion. I don't recall mentioning shield harmonics. You did. Approximately 47 seconds ago, during your analysis of the Gamma-7 facility's defensive capabilities. Data's golden eyes were steady. The specifications you provided don't match classified intelligence on that facility. Where did you obtain that information? The room fell silent. Every eye turned to Herthel. His expression shifted, just for an instant, from confusion to calculation. It was the calculation that gave him away. The real Admiral Herthel would have shown indignation or concern. This being showed tactical assessment. Security, Worf said quietly, his hand moving to his phaser. The changeling could have fled. Could have shifted form and attempted to escape through the ventilation system or become one of the other officers. Instead, it did something unexpected, it attacked. Herthel's form rippled and surged forward, not toward the exits but toward Thrawn himself. Shape-shifting mid-leap into something with claws and momentum that could kill before security could react. But Thrawn had already moved. The Grand Admiral's combat training, decades of experience fighting in the unknown regions against species that made changelings look predictable, kicked in with muscle memory precision. He dropped low, pulled the phaser he'd kept concealed, and fired at point-blank range. The changeling screamed, a sound unlike anything humanoid, as the phaser's energy disrupted its molecular cohesion. It collapsed mid-transformation, solidifying into an amorphous golden mass. Containment field, now. Odo shouted, rushing forward with a portable force field generator. The changeling was still conscious, still dangerous, but the field locked it in place before it could recover. The room exploded into controlled chaos. Security teams swept every corner. Data initiated comprehensive bioscans of all personnel. Troy moved from officer to officer, verifying emotional authenticity. Worf positioned himself at the primary entrance, ensuring nothing else could escape. But Thrawn was already analyzing the next problem. That wasn't the only infiltrator. Herthel attacked to create distraction. Where's the real threat? His red eyes swept the room, processing patterns. Officers moving toward exits, expected during emergency. Security personnel coordinating response, expected. Admiral Ross moving to secure communication systems. No. Not quite right. Admiral Ross's posture was perfect. His movements were efficient. His expression showed appropriate concern. But something about the way he moved toward the communication console was too purposeful. Not evacuating or coordinating, positioning. Admiral Ross, step away from that console, Thrawn said quietly, his phaser still drawn. Ross turned, his expression showing confusion that looked entirely genuine. Grand Admiral, we need to alert Fleet Command about the changeling infiltration. Admiral Ross knows the communication protocols for changeling infiltration events. He wouldn't use that console, he'd use the secured terminal in his office. Thrawn's phaser remained steady. Who are you? I'm Admiral William Ross, commander of the... You're a changeling impersonating Admiral Ross. Excellent work, your research on his behavior patterns is thorough. But you made one mistake. The real Admiral Ross has a slight limp from an injury sustained during the Battle of Chintoka. You're moving too smoothly. The false Admiral Ross's expression shifted, not to calculation this time, but to something approaching respect. Remarkable. Most solids wouldn't notice such details. I'm not most solids. Thrawn gestured to Worf. Commander, please verify Admiral Ross's identity. Worf moved forward with a blood screening device. The changeling could have maintained the deception. Blood screening only worked if changelings allowed their blood to separate from their bodies. But this infiltrator had been compromised, its mission failed. It shifted smoothly, abandoning Ross's form for its natural gelatinous state. You've won this engagement, Grand Admiral Thrawn. But the war continues. The Founders are learning your patterns as quickly as you learn ours. Eventually, we will adapt. Perhaps. But today, you failed. That failure teaches the Founders something important, that solid strategists can match changeling calculation. Thrawn lowered his phaser as Odo activated a second containment field. Where is the real Admiral Ross? Alive. Confined in a maintenance facility beneath this complex. We don't kill unnecessarily, we're not barbarians. The changeling's form rippled. The Founders wanted to understand your strategic methods firsthand. I was to observe, report, identify vulnerabilities. My companion, it gestured toward the captured Herthel changeling, was insurance in case direct action became necessary. 2 infiltrators for 1 strategic conference. The Dominion is investing heavily in my elimination. Thrawn moved closer to the containment field. Tell the Founders something for me. Tell them this war doesn't need to continue. The Alpha Quadrant doesn't threaten the Dominion. The Federation, the Klingon, the Romulans, we're defending our sovereignty, not attacking theirs. The Founders' fear of persecution by solids is understandable given their history, but projecting that fear through conquest only validates their paranoia. Pretty words. The Founders have heard pretty words before, usually right before betrayal. The changeling's form solidified slightly, assuming vaguely humanoid shape. You're different from other solids, Grand Admiral. You understand pattern and strategy at near Founder levels. In another reality, you might have made an interesting ally. In this one, you're simply a threat to be neutralized. Then tell your Founders they'll need better changelings. Thrawn stepped back. Constable, these infiltrators are your responsibility. I trust you'll ensure they're secured properly. Odo nodded, his expression unreadable. Watching Founder-trained changelings captured by solids was complex for him, pride in the security victory mixed with complicated feelings about his own people. The real Admiral Ross was recovered from the maintenance facility 40 minutes later, unconscious but unharmed, sealed in a stasis pod that had kept him alive while the changeling studied his behavior through recorded memories. Dr. Crusher examined him personally, confirming his identity and clearing him for duty after appropriate observation. The strategic conference reconvened 3 hours later with significantly enhanced security protocols and considerably more paranoid atmosphere. But the operational plans Thrawn had presented were genuine, and debate continued, now informed by the knowledge that Dominion infiltration of Starfleet Command's highest levels had been possible. Captain Picard pulled Thrawn aside during a break. That was extraordinary work. You engineered an entire scenario to expose infiltrators while simultaneously developing legitimate strategic plans. Multi-layered thinking of the highest order. Necessary thinking. The Dominion responds to patterns. I created a pattern that forced them into predictable response, then exploited that predictability. Thrawn glanced toward where the changeling infiltrators were being transferred to maximum security confinement. But Captain, we've only won a tactical engagement. Strategically, the situation remains complex. Because the Founders now know you can identify their infiltrators. Because the founders now know I can identify these infiltrators, using these methods, under these specific conditions. They'll adapt. Train changelings to mask the tells I exploited today. Develop new infiltration methodologies that account for my analytical framework. Thrawn's expression was tired, the first genuine fatigue Picard had seen him show. Every victory teaches them. Every success makes future success harder. Then what do? We evolve faster than they adapt. We stay unpredictable. We leverage advantages they can't counter, diversity of thought, independent command authority, individual initiative. Everything the Dominion's control-based structure can't replicate. Thrawn moved to the viewport overlooking San Francisco. But there's another consideration. The Dominion launched this infiltration operation knowing it had significant failure probability. They risked 2 highly trained changeling operatives on assassination attempt that had maybe 40% success probability. That suggests desperation. Or determination to eliminate you regardless of cost. Possibly. But desperation seems more probable given their recent strategic repositioning. They're defensive, learning, adapting, but also uncertain. We've disrupted their strategic calculations significantly. Thrawn pulled up classified intelligence on his personal PADD. I've been analyzing Dominion fleet movements over the past month. They're not just defensive, they're consolidating. Pulling resources from secondary objectives to reinforce primary strongholds. That's what military forces do when they're preparing for either major offensive or negotiated withdrawal. Picard absorbed this carefully. You think the Dominion might be willing to negotiate? I think the founders are rational actors who respond to cost-benefit analysis. This war is expensive, resources, casualties, attention diverted from Gamma Quadrant security. If we demonstrate that continued conflict costs more than negotiated settlement, they'll negotiate. But we need to approach from position of strength, not weakness. Which means implementing the offensive operations I proposed earlier. Those operations are extremely risky. Even with your strategic planning, casualties would be significant. Less significant than continued grinding stalemate that lasts another 3 years. And significantly less significant than Dominion victory if they successfully adapt to our tactics before we force negotiation. Thrawn's red eyes met Picard's directly. Captain, I've studied hundreds of conflicts across my career. The ones that end decisively, with minimal total casualties, are the ones where somebody takes calculated risk at critical moment. The ones that drag on endlessly are the ones where everyone plays it safe and avoids decisive action. You're asking Starfleet to gamble billions of lives on your strategic calculations. I'm asking Starfleet to trust mathematics and cultural analysis over emotional caution. The Dominion can be defeated. Not through attrition, but through psychological warfare that undermines their certainty about changeling superiority. We've already started that process by capturing founder infiltrators. We continue it by striking targets they believe are untouchable. We finish it by offering honorable negotiated settlement that preserves their security while respecting Alpha Quadrant sovereignty. Picard was silent for a long moment, processing. Everything Thrawn said made logical sense. But logic didn't account for the human cost of miscalculation. I'll support your proposals to Admiral Ross and Starfleet Command. But Grand Admiral, if this goes wrong, if your offensive operations fail and casualties exceed projections, the Federation will blame you. You'll be vilified as the dimensional refugee who led us into disaster. I'm aware. But I'd rather be vilified for attempting victory than praised for managing comfortable stalemate that kills people slowly. Thrawn turned from the viewport. Besides, Captain, I've been vilified before. The Empire considered me a brilliant strategist and dangerous independent thinker simultaneously. I survived that contradiction. I'll survive this one if necessary. Over the following weeks, Starfleet Command debated Thrawn's proposed offensive operations with intense scrutiny. Every admiral had opinions. Every tactical specialist found potential flaws. Every intelligence officer questioned assumptions. But the mathematics was undeniable. Thrawn's projections, backed by comprehensive cultural analysis and precise tactical calculations, showed that coordinated strikes against key Dominion facilities had 73% probability of forcing negotiated settlement within 6 months. Continued defensive posture had 92% probability of war lasting another 3 years with casualties exceeding current projections by 40%. Admiral Ross presented the analysis to the Federation Council. Politicians debated, agonized, consulted with constituents and allies. The Klingons supported aggressive action, it aligned with their warrior philosophy. The Vulcans expressed logical concerns about risk assessment. The Betazoids, still recovering from Dominion occupation, wanted revenge and security in equal measure. Finally, after 5 weeks of debate, the Federation Council authorized Operation Dominion's End, coordinated offensive against 3 strategic targets, commanded by experienced field officers but planned using Thrawn's analytical framework. And through all of it, Thrawn continued his work, refining tactical parameters, updating intelligence assessments, teaching Federation officers how to think strategically beyond standard doctrine. He conducted seminars on pattern recognition, cultural analysis, psychological warfare. Some officers embraced his methods enthusiastically. Others remained skeptical, viewing his approach as unproven theory rather than rigorous military science. But even the skeptics couldn't argue with results. Every operation planned using Thrawn's framework succeeded with fewer casualties than projected. Every engagement he advised achieved objectives with minimal resource expenditure. The Grand Admiral from another dimension was proving his value repeatedly. And then, 3 days before Operation Dominion's End was scheduled to launch, Section 31 made their final recruitment attempt. Luther Sloan appeared in Thrawn's quarters late at night, materializing through technology that bypassed every security protocol. "Last chance," Sloan said without preamble. "Join Section 31. We'll provide everything you need, resources for dimensional research, complete operational autonomy, access to intelligence the Federation Council doesn't know exists. In exchange, you provide strategic consultation exclusively to us." "I've already declined this offer. Multiple times." Thrawn didn't look up from the tactical projections he was reviewing. "That was before you demonstrated you can win this war. Now you're too valuable to remain independent. Either you work with us, or," Sloan let the implication hang. Thrawn finally looked up, red eyes cold. "Or what? Section 31 eliminates me? Interesting strategy, kill the strategist who's engineered potential Dominion defeat because he won't submit to control. That would confirm everything I've said about your organization prioritizing control over effectiveness. We don't want to eliminate you. We want to utilize you properly. You want to own me. There's a difference." Thrawn stood, moving toward Sloan with dangerous grace. "Mr. Sloan, I've been patient with Section 31's recruitment attempts because I understand organizational psychology. You see valuable asset, you attempt acquisition. Standard intelligence operation logic. But my patience has limits. As does our tolerance for independent operators with strategic knowledge of Federation vulnerabilities. Then we have a problem. Because I'm not joining Section 31, I'm not submitting to your control, and I'm not disappearing quietly because you find me inconvenient." Thrawn's voice was quiet but carried absolute conviction. "Here's what's going to happen. Operation Dominion's End will launch. It will succeed. The Dominion will be forced to negotiate. And afterward, I'll make my decision about long-term plans, which may include staying, may include searching for a way home, may include something else entirely. But whatever I decide, it will be my decision. Not yours, not Starfleet's, not anyone's. You're declaring independence from everyone. I'm declaring that I'm a free agent who cooperates voluntarily rather than through coercion. The Federation claims to value individual liberty. Let's see if they actually mean it." Thrawn moved past Sloan toward the door. "Now get out of my quarters. I have work to do." For a moment, Sloan looked genuinely uncertain, perhaps the first time in decades he'd encountered someone who couldn't be leveraged, manipulated, or controlled. Then he smiled faintly. "You're either the most principled person in the galaxy or the most arrogant. I genuinely can't tell which." "Both." "Neither. Does it matter if the results are identical?" Thrawn opened the door. "Tell your superiors at Section 31 that Grand Admiral Thrawn is not for sale, not for recruitment, and not for elimination. I'm here to help the Federation win this war. After that, we'll see what happens." After Sloan departed, Thrawn returned to his tactical projections. But his hands were shaking slightly, reaction to adrenaline and suppressed anger. He'd fled one galaxy to escape imperial politics and authoritarian control. He wouldn't submit to the same patterns in this universe. The Federation claimed to be different, built on principles of liberty, diversity, democratic values. If those principles were genuine, they'd respect his independence. If they weren't, then the Federation was just another empire wearing democratic disguise. Operation Dominion's end would reveal the truth. About the Dominion, about the Federation, and about whether Grand Admiral Thrawn had any future in this galaxy beyond being a weapon pointed at enemies. 3 days later, coordinated Federation task forces struck simultaneously at 3 Dominion strongholds. The operations were precise, devastating, executed with mathematical perfection based on Thrawn's strategic planning. Facility Gamma-7's shields collapsed under coordinated assault from multiple vectors, exactly as Thrawn had calculated they would. The Vorta administrative complex was captured intact, providing intelligence on Dominion logistics that would prove invaluable. And the Founder observation post near the wormhole was eliminated in a strike so precise the Founders themselves were forced to acknowledge solid strategic superiority. Within 72 hours, the Dominion requested negotiation. The war wasn't over, months of diplomatic maneuvering remained. But the trajectory had shifted. The Founders could no longer claim inevitable victory. The Federation had proven that diversity, innovation, and strategic brilliance could match Changeling calculation. And at the center of it all stood Grand Admiral Thrawn, dimensional refugee, cultural analyst, strategic genius. The being who'd changed everything simply by seeing patterns others missed. His future remained uncertain. But his impact was undeniable. 6 months after Operation Dominion's end, the Treaty of Bajorans was signed in the wardroom of Deep Space Nine, symbolic choice, given the station's role as flashpoint and turning point of the entire conflict. Dominion forces withdrew from Alpha Quadrant territory. The Founders agreed to recognize Federation sovereignty and cease expansion beyond the wormhole. In exchange, the Federation pledged non-aggression and established diplomatic channels for peaceful coexistence. The war was over. Billions of lives saved. Countless worlds spared continued devastation. And Grand Admiral Thrawn stood at the observation window of his quarters on Deep Space Nine, watching the celebrations on the promenade below, feeling profoundly alone. Commander Sisko found him there, 2 glasses of Saurian brandy in hand. "Thought you might want company," Sisko said, offering 1 glass. "Thank you, Commander." Thrawn accepted the drink but didn't immediately sip it. "It's strange. I've spent my entire career pursuing victory, for the Chiss ascendancy, for the Empire, for clients and causes across my galaxy. But when victory arrives, it always feels incomplete. Because victory doesn't change the fundamental problems. Just postpones them." Sisko joined him at the window. "The Dominion is contained, not defeated. They'll rebuild, reconsider their options, potentially try again in a generation or 2. All we've bought is time. Time is all any civilization ever buys. The question is what you do with it." Thrawn finally sipped the brandy, appreciating its complexity. The Federation will use this time to strengthen democratic institutions, expand cultural exchange, build alliances. The Dominion will use it to analyze what went wrong and develop counters. In 30 years, maybe 50, they'll try again. Unless the fundamental dynamic changes. Unless the founders learn that cooperation produces better outcomes than domination. Sisko's expression was thoughtful. You think that's possible? I think changelings are as capable of learning as any species. They learn to fear solids through persecution. Perhaps they can learn trust through consistent peaceful interaction. Thrawn turned from the window. But that's the Federation's challenge now, not mine. My role in this story is finished. Is it? Sisko set down his glass. Starfleet Command wants you to stay. Admiral Ross has authorized a commission. You be the first non-Federation citizen granted flag rank in Starfleet history. You'd have resources, authority, the ability to shape strategic doctrine for generations. And I'd be bound by Starfleet regulations, Federation oversight, the very democratic processes that make the Federation admirable but sometimes frustratingly slow. Thrawn shook his head. Commander, I appreciate the offer. Genuinely. But I'm not built for peacetime military service. I'm a problem solver who thrives on strategic challenges. Without existential threats requiring immediate response, I'd become exactly what Section 31 feared, an independent operator with dangerous knowledge and no clear purpose. So what will you do? Thrawn was silent for a long moment, red eyes reflecting the celebration lights below. Dr. Dax has been analyzing the spatial anomaly data the Dominion provided, before we discovered it was part of their infiltration operation. Turns out the data was genuine. There are dimensional rifts occurring periodically in the Gamma Quadrant. Rare, unpredictable, but potentially navigable with proper preparation. You're going to try to go home. I'm going to investigate the possibility. Captain Sisko, Thrawn met his eyes directly. I've spent 7 months in your universe. I've helped win a war, made allies, learned to appreciate Federation ideals. But I abandoned responsibilities in my galaxy. The empire I served, the forces under my command, the strategic objectives I was pursuing, all left incomplete when the dimensional rupture occurred. If there's a chance to return, to finish what I started, I need to explore it. Even knowing you might not find anything. That you might be chasing an impossibility. Even then. Because not knowing would be worse than failing to find a way back. Thrawn's expression carried something vulnerable, rare for him. Commander, I'm 47 years old by my species' life cycle. Chiss live roughly as long as humans. I've spent 30 years in military service, fighting battles, managing crises, pursuing strategic objectives. I'm tired. And I'm homesick for a galaxy I may never see again. Sisko nodded slowly, understanding. When do you leave? 3 weeks. Time to finish consultations with Starfleet Command, transfer strategic analyses to Federation tacticians, ensure the frameworks I've developed can be sustained without my direct involvement. And, Thrawn hesitated, time to say proper goodbyes. I've become attached to people here. More than I expected. Over those final 3 weeks, Thrawn settled his affairs with characteristic precision. He met with every senior Starfleet officer who'd worked with him, providing comprehensive briefings on strategic methodology. He conducted final training sessions for tactical specialists learning pattern recognition analysis. He compiled exhaustive documentation on Dominion psychology, founder cultural patterns, Vorta administrative structures, intelligence that would serve the Federation for decades. And he met privately with the individuals who'd become, surprisingly, something approaching friends. Garak found him in the cargo bay studio one final time, surrounded by holographic projections of artwork from across the Alpha Quadrant. Leaving without saying goodbye would have been terribly rude, Garak said, settling into his usual chair. Though I suppose for someone from another dimension, social niceties might seem less important than existential journeys. I was going to say goodbye. Eventually. Thrawn closed the art projections. Mr. Garak, you've been invaluable during my time here. Your intelligence, your perspective, your willingness to operate in moral gray areas while maintaining essential principles, you remind me of myself in better moments. Careful, Grand Admiral. Compliments from you feel dangerously sincere. But Garak's smile was genuine. Will you find your way home? I don't know. The probability is low, perhaps 15% based on available data. But low probability isn't zero probability. And I need to try. Of course you do. Because you're a strategist who can't leave problems unsolved, even problems that might be unsolvable. Garak stood, offering his hand in the human custom. If you do find your way back to your galaxy, try not to let empires collapse or wars consume everything. The universe has enough chaos without strategic geniuses making it worse. I'll do my best. Though chaos has a way of finding strategic geniuses regardless of intentions. Thrawn accepted the handshake. Take care of this station, Mr. Garak. And take care of yourself. Cardassia will need intelligent, principled voices during reconstruction. Try not to get yourself killed in the process. No promises. Life would be terribly boring without occasional assassination attempts. Odo came next, his liquid features showing more emotion than usual. I never thanked you properly, Odo said without preamble. For asking about changeling art. For treating me as someone with valuable perspective rather than just a security officer who happens to be a shapeshifter. You provided insight no one else could. Your understanding of founder psychology was critical to several operational successes. Thrawn gestured to chairs, though Odo typically preferred standing. Constable, the Federation is fortunate to have you. You're proof that changelings can choose differently than the founders. That biology doesn't determine destiny. The founders would disagree. To them, I'm a curiosity at best, a traitor at worst. Odo's form shifted slightly, discomfort expressing itself through molecular rearrangement. But you showed me that my differences from both the founders and solids could be strengths rather than weaknesses. That perspective matters. It does. More than most realize. Thrawn stood, facing Odo directly. The treaty with the Dominion includes provisions for limited cultural exchange. Eventually, the founders will send representatives to the Alpha Quadrant. When they do, you'll be the bridge between civilizations. The changeling who understands both perspectives. That role will be difficult, frustrating, sometimes painful. But critically important. You're telling me I have purpose beyond security work. I'm telling you you've always had purpose beyond security work. You just needed someone to point it out. Thrawn offered a small bow, respect between equals. Live well, Constable Odo. And remember, being different isn't weakness. It's evolutionary advantage. Major Kira was blunt, as always. I'm glad you helped us win. I'm glad you're leaving. She crossed her arms, standing in the doorway of Thrawn's quarters. Not because I dislike you, though I'm not sure like is the right word for how I feel about strategic geniuses from other dimensions. But because you're too comfortable with moral ambiguity. The Federation needs clear principles, not pragmatic calculation. The Federation needs both. Principles without pragmatism becomes self-destructive idealism. Pragmatism without principles becomes authoritarian efficiency. Thrawn gestured her inside. Major, you fought Cardassian occupation for decades. You understand that survival sometimes requires difficult choices. I respect that you maintain principles despite that understanding. It's admirable. But don't let principle become rigidity. Easy for you to say. You're not the one who lived under occupation, who watched people die because principles weren't respected. Kira's voice carried old anger, carefully controlled. The Cardassians were pragmatic. They justified everything through strategic necessity. And they destroyed Bajorans in the process. The Cardassians were expansionist authoritarians who used pragmatism as excuse for brutality. That's different from genuine strategic calculation guided by ethical principles. Thrawn's expression was serious. Major, I've served empires. I've witnessed what happens when power operates without constraint. It's why I appreciate the Federation's commitment to democratic oversight and ethical guidelines. But I've also witnessed what happens when principles become excuses for inaction. Balance is essential. Kira was silent for a long moment. You're leaving because you can't find that balance here. I'm leaving because I have unfinished business in my own galaxy. But yes, I'm also leaving because the Federation doesn't need me anymore. The war is over. Strategic planning can return to peacetime frameworks. My particular skills are less relevant now. Thrawn moved to his packed belongings, everything he'd accumulated during 7 months in this universe fitting into 2 standard cases. Take care of Commander Sisko, Major. He's a good man who carries impossible burdens. Make sure those burdens don't break him. I will. And Thrawn, she hesitated, then continued, if you do find your way home, try to make your galaxy better than you left it. You're too smart to waste on empire building and power games. I'll try. Those smart people have been wasting themselves on empire building and power games since civilizations began. Old habits die hard. The final goodbye was the hardest. Commander Sisko met Thrawn in the wardroom where they'd first spoken 7 months ago, full circle, closure of narrative arc. The runabout is prepared, Sisko said. Supplies for 6 months, enhanced sensors for detecting spatial anomalies, subspace communication equipment so you can contact us if you find anything. Or if you don't, and need to come back. Thank you, Commander. For everything. The trust, the resources, the willingness to work with someone who had every reason to be suspicious. Thrawn extended his hand. I came to your universe accidentally. But I'd like to think the accident had purpose. That helping the Federation defeat the Dominion justified the disruption to everyone's lives. You saved billions of lives. Changed the course of history. Taught us new ways of thinking about strategy and cultural analysis. I'd say the disruption was justified. Sisko accepted the handshake firmly. But Thrawn, if you don't find a way home, you're welcome here. Always. Deep Space Nine, Starfleet Command, wherever you want to go. You've earned a place in this galaxy. I appreciate that more than you know. But I need to try. For closure if nothing else. Thrawn released the handshake. Commander, one final piece of advice. The Dominion will honor the treaty as long as it serves their interests. The moment circumstances change, new threats in the Gamma Quadrant, internal political shifts, perceived Federation weakness, they'll reconsider their position. Stay vigilant. Keep building alliances. And remember that cultural analysis isn't magic, it's disciplined observation anyone can learn with practice. I'll remember. And I'll make sure Starfleet Command remembers too. Sisko walked with Thrawn to the airlock where the runabout waited. Leave long and prosper, Grand Admiral Thrawn. May your journey find what you're searching for. And may your station remain the crossroads of understanding it's become. The galaxy needs places where different cultures meet peacefully. Deep Space Nine proved that's possible. The runabout Orinoco departed Deep Space Nine at 1,347 hours, heading for the Bajoran wormhole and the Gamma Quadrant beyond. Thrawn sat at the helm, piloting manually rather than trusting automated systems, his red eyes focused on the viewscreen showing receding station. He'd arrived 7 months ago through spatial accident, displaced, alone, uncertain. He departed by choice, prepared, informed, still uncertain but no longer alone in quite the same way. He carried with him the knowledge that other universes existed, other civilizations faced similar challenges, other versions of warfare and peace and strategic calculation. The wormhole opened before him, that beautiful, terrifying tunnel between quadrants. He'd crossed it dozens of times during the war, but this crossing felt different. Final, somehow. Threshold between what was and what might be. Orinoco entered the wormhole, and for a moment Thrawn saw the prophets, the wormhole aliens that Bajorans worshipped. They appeared as figures from his past, Admiral Ar'alani from the Chiss Ascendancy, Emperor Palpatine, even glimpses of people he'd lost over decades of warfare. They didn't speak, just observed, judged, perhaps offered blessing or warning he couldn't interpret. Then the wormhole released him into the Gamma Quadrant, and the visions vanished. He set course for the coordinates where dimensional rifts had been detected, 3 days' travel at maximum warp into space the Dominion no longer controlled. The mission probability was low. Success uncertain. But Grand Admiral Thrawn had built a career on calculated risks and pattern recognition. If dimensional physics followed consistent patterns, rifts would occur where subspace membranes were weakest. If his calculations were correct, he could be in position when the next rift opened. If probability favored him, that rift would connect to his home galaxy. Many ifs. Many unknowns. But certainty was overrated. Strategy required accepting uncertainty and acting decisively despite incomplete information. 3 weeks later, the Orinoco's sensors detected an anomaly, subspace distortion matching the profile of the rift that had brought him here. Thrawn positioned the runabout carefully, calculating trajectories and energy signatures, preparing to enter if the opportunity arose. The rift opened. For 17 seconds, it connected this universe to somewhere else. Readings suggested dimensional rather than spatial displacement. Thrawn initiated acceleration, the runabout diving toward the rift with everything the engines could provide. And in those final seconds before crossing the threshold, he activated the subspace message he'd prepared, a final communication to Deep Space Nine, to Commander Sisko, to everyone who'd become part of his story in this galaxy. Commander Sisko, I've located a viable dimensional rift. Attempting crossing now. If this message reaches you, I've succeeded in returning home. If you never hear from me again, either I've succeeded but can't communicate across dimensional barriers, or I've failed and been lost in the attempt. Either way, thank you for everything. The Federation's ideals, diversity as strength, diplomacy as first resort, liberty as highest value, are worth defending. Remember that during the challenges ahead. And remember that strategic brilliance without ethical foundation is just sophisticated brutality. I learned that lesson in my galaxy. Don't let this galaxy forget it. Grand Admiral Thrawn, signing off. Live long and prosper. The runabout entered the rift. Energy cascaded across shields. Space-time twisted into geometries no humanoid mind was designed to perceive. For a moment that lasted both an instant and eternity, Thrawn existed in liminal space between universes, neither here nor there, neither when nor where. Then the rift collapsed, and the Orinoco was gone. On Deep Space Nine, Sisko received the message 72 hours later. He listened to it twice, then filed it in both official records and personal archives. Grand Admiral Thrawn, dimensional refugee, strategic genius, reluctant hero, had left their universe the same way he'd arrived, through spatial phenomenon that defied conventional physics. Whether he'd found his way home or been lost forever between dimensions, they'd never know. But his impact remained. Starfleet tactical doctrine incorporated his analytical frameworks. Cultural analysis became standard component of strategic planning. The Federation approached future conflicts with new appreciation for pattern recognition and psychological warfare. And on Deep Space Nine's promenade, in a small shop selling Bajoran artifacts, a blue-skinned figure carved from stone stood on display, commissioned by Garak, sculpted by Bajoran artist, depicting Grand Admiral Thrawn in his characteristic pose, calm, focused, red eyes seeing patterns others missed. Below the sculpture, a small plaque. To Grand Admiral Thrawn, who taught us that understanding precedes victory, and that wisdom transcends dimensions. May your journey find peace. The war was over. The hero had departed. The galaxy continued turning, facing new challenges and opportunities with tools the Grand Admiral had provided. And somewhere, perhaps in another dimension, perhaps lost forever in the spaces between, Thrawn pursued his next objective with the same methodical precision that had defined his entire career. The story had ended. But stories never truly end, they just pause, waiting for the next chapter to begin. Live long and prosper. Hit the subscribe button for more amazing stories.